I think that we have all been lied to. I think there's been lies that have been perpetrated and perpetuated for probably since the beginning.
Hello and welcome to the Ann and Phelim Scoop. I'm Phelim McAleer.
And I'm Ann McElhinney.
Yes, you are indeed. So we're not in our normal California studio.
No.
With this perfect weather.
Oh, we're going to get back to that. Okay.
We are in fact in Austin, Texas, with its less than perfect weather. For our special Thanksgiving episode, and it's a very special episode because we're interviewing a very special person. We're interviewing Zachary Levi, our friend, who is also an actor and is also much, much more. And we're going to talk about that as well. Welcome to the show, Zachary.
Thanks. Good to see you guys. It's been a little while.
It's been a minute. Yeah.
Yes. Now, Zach, for those who might not be familiar with you and your work, let's do the official bio and intro. Zachary Levi is an American actor, perhaps best known for his roles as Chuck Bartowski in the NBC drama Chuck, and he had the leading role in the superhero film Shazam and its sequel. You were the voice of Flynn Rider in Tangled, which you did great show as well, by the way.
Thanks.
For which you won a Grammy for that as well.
No, I did not. No, I think that the song was nominated for an Oscar, but we lost that. Actually, you know what? I think that the song may have won a Grammy, but I didn't win a Grammy.
Oh, right,
as a part of that.
But but you sang that song on the Grammy,
yes,
on the Oscars.
Yeah,
yes,
Andy and I did.
I remember that.
Yeah,
that was very impressive. I was going, I know that guy. Anyway,
we always do that when you're on the television. We all go, we know him.
We know that guy.
We know that guy. Yes.
You've even been on Broadway. You were in a musical called She Loves Me, for which you received a Tony Award nomination. My personal favorite of your Broadway musicals was First Date, which I have to say I particularly enjoyed. I think you should have got the Tony nomination for that.
Thank you.
And then in 2022, you published a memoir, Radical Love, Learning to Accept Yourself and Others, an amazing book which you told of your personal journey from a dysfunctional childhood to depression and anxiety to finding joy, gratitude and purpose. And then this year you released a companion book, Go Love Yourself, Help for the Journey to Mental and Emotional Wellness. And so welcome to the show,
Thanks.
Zachary Levi.
He really hasn't done that much, actually, really.
Yeah.
By the way, that's
Still trying to hit my stride.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, I bet that isn't even coming close to it.
There's the movies that he did recently. Well,
yes, and also he has a foundation and helps people with mental health issues in colleges, which I want to talk about
and
again.
we didn't talk about Nerd HQ, and we didn't talk about
his plans for the
your
future.
Kurt Warner movie as well, which we particularly enjoyed as well.
Thank you. Yes,
we
Kurt Warner.
loved that.
No, we didn't understand anything about football, obviously.
No, of course not.
No,
You're
it's
Irish.
all
How
this.
would you
Yes.
possibly
We have no
understand?
idea. We have no idea about your strange games.
Yes, but we enjoyed the story. Yes.
Well, we want to start by recapping how we met in the first place, which was
Sure.
I think I'm going to say 15 years ago, we went to a Friends of Abe. We can say it now out loud. Look at us saying things out
Look at
loud
that,
now.
yeah.
What's that going to be? Well, that can end only somewhere really good, right? So we met you at a Friends of Abe meeting, and which was conservatives who were basically in the closet hiding their conservatism but wanting to meet each other, like in a kind of an Alcoholics Anonymous setting where people went, "Hi, my name is Brian. I really love America." And it was like, "Okay, you're okay, Brian. It's okay to be here now." Do you remember that? It was it was actually really amazing. And there were amazing people there. I'm not going to go outing people, but there were amazing people there, including yourself. And it was like quite amazing for us to meet all these people. We were a wet weekend in the town, by the way. In fact, we weren't even living in California. No. And anyway, long story short, we were going over to Andrew Breitbart's house, the great Andrew Breitbart, and you drove us over. And I think both of us have the same memory of this, which is so funny. You had like a truck, but the steering wheel of the truck had Jesus written, right? And you see, here's what you need to understand. You see, Irish Catholics, we do this whole kind of like, we have faith and whatever, but super quiet.
Yeah.
Like, we don't be talking about it now.
Yeah.
Now, you be all talking about it and everything and have Jesus written on the... So we were like...
We don't stand up and sing in church or anything.
Oh, we never sing in church either. We're really quiet.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is kind of very
I was going, wow, he's got Jesus written on his...
Well, in fairness, that was kind of it was like a joke gift that my friend Ryan Chase, so I'm sure you guys remember Ryan.
That's right.
He had picked it up at like some gas station or something, and he brought it home for me as a laugh. Not that it's not representative of part of my faith, but it's not something that I would normally put on my steering wheel. But I was like, you know what, this is fun and funny, and why not? So I put it on my steering wheel. So it's funny that you would remember that. Yeah.
But it's funny, but it's also in your book. One of the things that you said was like that when you're in church, that you're the guy who's doing all this stuff and singing and everything. Yeah, we don't relate to that at all. You see, we're like, we get.
You should though.
We should.
It really is great for your soul. It is. I mean, listen, to vocalize one's faith, it really is something that is a powerful instrument in exercising one's faith. I do believe, and I think that there's. By the way, and I'm not saying that this needs to happen all of the time.
Yeah.
But I think that there is a marked difference. I mean, my grandma used to bring me and my sisters to Catholic Mass when we were kids. My mother grew up Catholic. She was the oldest of 5 kids, and she rejected Catholicism. I think when she was in her late teens, because she just. I think part of that was my grandmother was not a great representation of Christ.
Oh, dear.
Though very devoted to her Catholicism. I think, unfortunately, that's the case with a lot of folks. Whether they're Catholic or not, I think that, unfortunately, a lot of people reject the faith of their parents because their parents might be very abusive or whatever, and therefore are not great representations of that faith. But so my mom very much went away from Catholicism and found kind of spirit-filled Christianity.
Yes.
But my grandmother was still kind of a babysitter for me and my sister sometimes. And so we would get dragged to Mass. And I remember even as a child, thinking, I don't feel, and it's not to say, just so everybody hears me here, I'm not saying people don't find God at Mass. I'm not saying that there aren't some incredibly deeply spiritual, connected to God Catholics. I, as a child, felt like it was very disconnected from the Spirit of God.
It's Catholic Mass is very passive. Well, the people are very passive in it, right? Now, apparently, when it was a Latin Mass, it was more mystical. It was more...
Sure.
It was even more... that was the criticism of it, though, that it was more very, very distant, and the priest was kind of doing his thing, and the people were kind of being quiet and reciting these Latin prayers. But I have to say... I'm in the Latin Mass quarter, and if you haven't been to a Latin Mass, put it on your bucket list.
I'd be happy to. Listen, I love experiencing it all, and quite honestly, I would be happy to go and experience a religious ceremony of other religions as well, just to be able to understand how are they connecting to God. But in my experience in Mass, again, in Ventura, California, as a child, going to the Catholic church that my grandmother went to. It felt very Simon Says, you're repeating after. It's not a conscious thing that you are saying as much as when the priest says this, then I say this, and they say this, and I say this, and now it's time to kneel, and now it's time to stand. And to me, that kind of doesn't represent the relationship we are to have with God, but more very much the liturgy of here's the ones and zeros of it.
Okay,
it's a ritual, not a spontaneous conversation. This reminds me. Kind of remember we went to that wonderful sermon by Father Scalia, who is Antonin Scalia's son, and he's a priest
in Washington D.C.
And I think the reading was about, so there was 2 people who repented, one was a tax collector, very unpopular, the other one was some other unpopular person, and one was up in a tree waving, and the other came to see him at night, and Father Scalia said, a public faith or no faith.
Yeah.
Going to see Jesus at night in the quiet doesn't cut it. You have to be public and
Zachary was the one who was public.
So yes, to go back to when we first met, and I remember you gave an interview in a magazine, which I cannot find, maybe you can remember what it was, where you said that on the sets, by the way, you used to be quite private-ish about your faith. You weren't, in the early days of Hollywood, you were private. I remember, listen, maybe I'm misquoting you from this interview, misremembering it, where you said, you try and be the happy person on set or the full of joy on set, and then people say, why, at the end, maybe people will say, why are you so happy? Why are you so full of joy? And you'll start talking about Jesus then. Am I misquoting you or misremembering?
No, I mean, that's roughly it. I think that what you're referring to, there was an article in Relevant magazine, which is a Christian publication. I'm not sure if they are still around, but, and that was early on in my career. So, you know, I haven't ever really been quiet about my faith, but I've never really found it to be beneficial to, like,
evangelize.
Yeah, listen. One of my favorite quotes of whether of Christian faith or otherwise. And I've recently found out that maybe it's not even a true quote, which is unfortunate. but there's a quote that it's attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, and it says, "Preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words." And
very good.
To me,
I like that one.
That is really so much of the crux of what we are called to do, particularly as Christians. Although I would consider myself at this point in my life almost Christian adjacent, which we can get into later. But I think regardless of your faith, or by the way, even aside from spirituality, your political affiliations, whatever that is, are you walking the walk or are you just talking the talk, right? And unfortunately, most people, they talk the talk, but if you really look at the way they carry themselves in their life, they are very incongruous with the words that are constantly coming out of their mouth. And so to me, I was always quite bold, I think, in walking the walk that I believed I was supposed to be walking, to the point where, you know, even early on in my career, like giving that that interview with Relevant magazine, or even on sets that I would be on, you know, there would be some butting of heads. You know, I did a sitcom years ago called Less Than Perfect, and there were a few of us in the cast that were people of faith, and there were people that were very not people of faith. One in particular, and they really did not like that. Like, we would all sign scripts, for example, for charity or whatever, and I would write, much love and God bless. And they went to the producers and said, I do not want to sign these scripts if they're putting God bless on the script. It was crazy. And now listen, I still have love for this person. I vehemently disagreed with them, and I did not stop doing what I did. And we would pray before each one of the shows and invite everyone else to pray with us, or a prayer right before we'd all go out, because it's a live show and all that stuff. Yeah. And this person would even join us for some of these things as well. But I was never. I never felt the need to go out and proselytize or evangelize. I just don't think that really gets you where you want to go often. I think that people are very averse to that, because unfortunately there have been a lot of people who come in the name of God who take advantage, they destroy. I mean, the amount of things done in the name of God throughout human history that have been incredibly horrible, the Spanish Inquisition being one of those things. These are not good looks for Christianity. Yeah. And so I don't think it's very beneficial oftentimes to come with this really heavy hand and, what people say, beating people over the head with the gospels or whatever. I just don't think that's ever really been very beneficial. But again, it's more about, are you walking the walk? And beyond that, now we live in an age of social media. Now we live in an age where you actually have these methods by which you can broadcast out to the world, hey, this is what I think, this is what I believe. Early in my career, I mean, really, social media didn't come around for, if I started in 99, social media didn't come around till 2012, really? Wow. So for all that time, I was vocal enough. I mean, I never felt like I was having to hide, but I also recognize that you need to kind of walk a bit of a razor's edge, because a lot of people in Hollywood are very averse to those types of things. And so it's, how do you maintain your identity and still hold your ground without also being so offensive with it? And I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that have gone so far as they became so offensive with, well, this is what I believe. And then they have suffered the consequences of that. And I don't know that I would blame Hollywood solely for that. I think that those people who feel like I can come out guns blazing and this is who I am and you got to like it or not. I mean, to me, that's a conservative version of what we're experiencing now on a lot of left-wing ideals, like, people that are experiencing gender dysphoria and are like, well, I'm being born biologically male, but they believe that they're a woman and like, I'm a woman and you got to respect that. Yes. Is very similar to I'm a Christian and you got to respect that. It's like, actually nobody does. Nobody actually has to respect that. That's not the way democracy works. You can be that, but don't feel like everybody else has to agree with what you believe in. And so anyway, yeah.
In their defense, it probably comes from a lifetime of being quiet on sets, and eventually it's just exploded, and it can be an overreaction to...
Maybe. Yeah. But again, I don't know that I don't, given my experience, I don't believe that and again, I won't name these names, but I think we all know some of the people that I'm referring to.
Yes.
I have a hard time believing that they were beaten into submission and couldn't at least just be who they were, right? Like, I don't buy that. And if they felt like they had to hide and hide and hide and hide and hide, and now this is the explosion, I think that there's still some culpability on their part of where they have found themselves, right? Anyway,
there could be a recent convert too, which is always a thing.
Yep.
So and I remember that interview where you talked about being the person on set and the person with joy, but you weren't happy on set, or you were happy on set, but your life...
I was. Well, that's the thing. Only later at 37 did I have a complete mental breakdown. When I moved here to Austin, there were myriad reasons. I mean, I go into a lot of detail in the book, but there were myriad reasons why I ultimately had this massive mental breakdown. But in hindsight, I can then look back and recognize that I was struggling with depression and anxiety. I mean, really since I was a child. I was just very good at hiding it from myself, from other people, because I didn't even know what it was that I was experiencing. And also mental illness, I like to liken it, as I do in the book, to mental health and dental health. Because very similarly, with cavities, if you take care of the cavity when it's a cavity, great. If you don't, then it just festers and it rots and it becomes worse and worse and worse, and then you need a full-blown root canal. Mental health, similarly, you can have a much smaller mental illness, but if you don't recognize it and you don't take care of it, then it festers and it gets worse. And so earlier on in my career, like when I gave that interview, the mental illness that I was struggling with was much smaller. It wasn't something that was nearly as progressed as it became when I was 37. And even still, even if it was the same, we are capable as humans to live in both places. You can be dealing with a deep down depression, but also still be experiencing joys, experiencing happiness in certain bouts, and for me, every time I was working, I was always very happy.
Yeah, because you were busy.
Yeah, you're busy. Your mind is taken off of a lot of things. Also, dopamine is a massive part of all of this. Yeah. People don't recognize evolutionarily, we come from hunter-gatherers, right? We were not distracted by all of these things all the time. We were living in very tight-knit groups of people. We all knew each other. We all trusted each other. We worked together. We had bonds, like real community. The men and women as a group all had community, but the men and women separately would go and hunt and gather and build incredible bonds. And we would be going through exercises that would constantly give us dopamine, moving our bodies every day. I mean, we're dying a slow death of...
sitting on sofas.
What's that? Of
sitting on the sofa, yeah.
Right, but what's the word I'm looking for?
Sedentary.
Sedentary, yes. Death by sedentary life.
Yeah.
And thank God we're starting to see these things and recognize these things. But I think that, these are all very a part of the root cause of this. So work substitutes a lot of what you would normally get by getting up and moving your body. And we would, as men, we would literally, march for miles and miles and miles looking for prey to hunt. Mm-hmm. And in the process, we would have to survive other predators coming and killing us and other tribes coming and killing us. And then we'd finally get the prey. And then we'd have to bring it back to our camp, surviving all of the way back. I mean, those are all just more and more and more ways that you are utilizing this incredible gift, this meat suit that, our souls occupy. And that God gave us these systems for dopamine. And so for work, when I'd be working, that would always be much more helpful. And so at work, my levels of joy were always much higher. But I would also argue that, not argue, but point out that it wasn't just the work. It was that I was accomplishing what I believe was and is my purpose in this world. I always knew since I was a little kid, not that I wanted to be an actor, although I did, that I was going to be. It was written on my heart. I could tell my parents at, basically 4, 5, 6 years old, like, I'm going to go do that. I'm supposed to go do that. I knew I was supposed to do it. My parents, of course, looked at me, pat me on the head and be like, "Oh, that's real nice, honey." But I knew. I knew that I knew. So
I've heard that. I've heard other actors say something similar, that they actually knew. Like Ethan Hawke, we happen to randomly know Ethan Hawke's mother. And I remember her saying that, she brought him to something like when he was a kid and he went, "I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm going to do." And a lot of kids don't say that, by the way.
Says, I think I can do that. He knew by looking at it, he could do it. I think it was a play or something. I can do that.
Yeah, but it wasn't even that I could.
Yes.
It was a knowing, and not a cerebral knowing, like a knowing in your
This is what I'm going to end up doing.
Yeah, like you can't really explain it. It is a knowing, right? And so therefore, when you are, I believe, living out your calling in this life, there's a lot of joy that springs from that.
Yeah.
I mean, similarly to like in Chariots of Fire, when that one guy, asks the kind of main star runner, he goes, "Why do you run?" And I'm paraphrasing here. I always screw up this quote, but he basically says, "Because God created me to run, and when I run, I feel His pleasure."
Correct. I remember
feel
that.
And so when I get to do what I feel like I've been created to do, and any of us does that, there's something that's really next level about the fulfillment, I think, in your life.
So you're lucky that you're not that you're not working in Vaughn's.
No,
like honestly,
I've done plenty of those regular jobs, and it's very character building.
But by the way, you do it you do what you do very, very well. I mean, from Chuck, which I liked,
thanks,
to even First Date, which
Phelim got to see, I didn't get to see, but you loved it.
Where were you, Ann?
I know. He was in New York and I was at home.
But
obviously, taking care of the cats.
It always struck me, it was really weird when I remember the critics writing about First Date, and it was like, surprisingly, Zach Levi is really good. And I'm going like, what surprise? This guy has been in... by the way, I think TV comedy is really difficult. I mean,
maybe.
Yeah, but because it's like, people are in their house watching the TV, and back then the TV was a lot smaller, the sound wasn't great, and you're making them laugh at home, tens of thousands of miles away, maybe in a different continent. And what made people think that you couldn't then entertain people on a stage?
Well, because there's plenty of people that do television and film and do it quite well, but you put them on a stage in front of 1,000 people to do live performance, they fall apart. They're not capable.
Well, I would like to quote one Magdalena Segeda, who is, as you well know, a colleague of ours who's in the room with us right now, who I remember, and I've quoted it so many times, said, I don't even know what the context was, but many, many years ago said, "That's what a star is. They can do anything." And that's you. You can dance. You can, and it's actually for the just to know for the rest of us, it's very upsetting actually, because literally, and there are some of you, and they're called stars because not everyone is that is acting on TV and that they're not stars. They can't do literally everything, and you're one of those people, and it's a beautiful and it's an amazing gift,
Yes.
and you're doing it for good. And I wanted to, this is kind of going all over the place, but I wanted to go back to the book a little bit, and because I imagine
you can even read an audiobook really well.
Oh my God, yeah, the audiobook I highly recommend, by the way, to everyone, Radical Love, but also to listen to the audiobook because Zach does the reading, and a very impressive, incredible reading, which I'm hiding here now. Showed up here, and we're going to get them signed before we leave. But the book, I had read the book a few years ago, and now I just reread it again. And it struck, one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, since you've written that and since it came out, I can imagine you have had a lot of people either try to write to you or, you've met them somewhere and they've read the book and they're like, thank you. Yeah. For saving my life. Thank you for telling me what I should have done, or reinforcing something that's been on my mind for a long time or whatever. And I think this mental health thing, I think it's it needs every kind of warrior out there helping. I mean, I don't know anyone now alive at this particular moment in history who unfortunately doesn't have a personal relationship with either themselves or a personal relationship with someone who has been extremely badly hurt, or the ultimate, or they have completely lost the battle. And it's and I think that's something. So the first question really is, have you had some lovely exchanges since you wrote the book?
Countless. It's honestly, it's everything. I think that I'm actually a pretty decent writer when I commit myself to writing.
Yeah.
But prior to this, I had written very little. I write. I had written a few scripts. I had written a few songs. I had written, I guess you could say, a few essays. In that, on social media, even there have been various posts where I am sharing something very important to me.
Yes.
And I take a lot of time to really craft those messages.
I notice.
But I've always been much more of an oral communicator. And, partly because I'm a performance, actor, entertainer. But I also just find that, the written word, unfortunately, lacks a lot of nuance. And this is why you can read a text from someone and, thank God for emojis sometimes. But
right.
Even emojis can be misinterpreted.
Yes.
But so I've always just felt like as someone who really wants to make sure somebody understands what I'm saying, I like to talk to someone about that. In fact, in a lot of my business dealings, I don't even like to do emails because I want to make sure that everyone understands this is exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So we can make sure that we adjust this or do this or, whatever needs to happen. So when this book came around, it was really, the impetus was as I talk about in the book, I had fallen apart, moved here, fell apart, then went to this life-saving therapy. And then in the midst of said therapy was offered, after having already turned down an opportunity to audition for the role of Shazam, I was then offered this opportunity to audition for a supporting role. And I had just had a breakthrough and I just started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I was like, okay, you know what, whatever, fine. It was like one scene, I'll put it on tape, and did one take and sent it in. And then of course, so by a week later, I was cast as Shazam. And that was an incredible, amazing journey, though also a very difficult one, through both movies. But, I still something I would never trade for anything. But when we were promoting the first Shazam, and I was doing talk shows and podcasts, I made it very clear to my publicists. I said, listen, I would be remiss to go and do all of this press
without
take the telling people that the only reason I am this role is because I went from suicide to superhero. I mean, that's really the journey.
Which used to be the title of the book, which brilliant title.
Well,
but inaccurate.
Yeah,
but inaccurate. That's why you have to change it.
I mean, listen, that was the original thing that as a concept that I had kind of pitched to these guys, and they really liked it because obviously it's got a grab to it,
Yeah.
But there's also something about it that felt a little, I don't know, glib. I don't know. Is it like, like I wanted it to.
No, it's also very tied up, and it's like, and it's exactly what you say in the book. It's like, you're not all fixed now.
Yeah.
People aren't fixed.
Exactly.
It's a work in progress that you keep.
So at any rate, so I made that clear, and then I ended up doing various interviews and podcasts, and I went on Jay Shetty's, and we got deep into it. And HarperCollins saw that podcast, and I think some other interviews that I did, and then they contacted us, my team, and said, "Hey, we would love for Zach to take that story and put it into a book." To which I said, I have a hard time reading books, let alone writing them, so I don't really know how we can go about this. And they said, listen, particularly, celebrity, like people like yourself that we talk to about writing a book or, pseudo memoir or whatever, everyone says the same thing. We have collaborator writers that can help you with that.
Yeah.
Everybody uses one. I was like, okay, well, If this is how normally works, then okay. And ultimately what it came down to was, what they were telling me was, this could really help a lot of people.
Yes.
And I thought, okay, if that's the case, then I'm willing to go through this journey and figure out how to get this out there if it actually could help some people. So the fact that now, a few years on, I have not only been inundated with so many messages that I get on social media, but I also meet a lot of people in the wild, or specifically at conventions. I do a lot of fan conventions and stuff like that. And lots of people who come up to me, and the amount of tears that I have been shed, not just by them, but by me, in them telling me that it saved their life, that they would not have been there. They were so close to have ended it. And I know what that feels like because I was there.
Yep.
And so it makes it all worth it, So it's,
any doubts you had about whether or not you were going to do this book? I mean, and I literally was texting someone who has some problems, and I was saying, I would recommend you need to read Zach's book,
Thank you.
Because, and also particularly with obviously this family trauma that you've lived through. And we have a very good friend who says something that, and I was going to mention it to you because I just think it's a great quote that he has. And he says about privilege, he said, there's only two types of people in the whole world. Only two.
No, there's the only privilege.
The only privilege. The world is divided between two sets of people. People whose parents loved them and loved each other, and everybody else. And I would add to that, people who loved themselves, loved each other, and loved their children, and everybody else. Yeah. And read it, and obviously, I mean, I'm in the very privileged group of was all kinds of love, and it was all great. I never knew anything of any of this stuff until much later in life, and it's through other people that I know about it, not in my own life. And it's very tough, and it's. A child deserves to grow up in a place where they don't know anything about any trouble, and all they know is validation, and you're just great, and do that, brilliant. Everything's brilliant, and being supported and loved all the time, and to have to try to work out how to live with what happened to you and come out of it, and radically love and forgive, and particularly forgiving your mother and all of that. Yeah. I mean, It's a lot. As you say, it's a lot of work.
It is, but it's so worth it. Yeah. It's so worth it because
you have to do it.
I really do believe that God is so good in an infinite amount of ways, but one of the ways that God is so good is every single thing, every trial and tribulation and trauma that you go through can be redeemed, can be flipped on its head and used as a gift that you have later. And the fact that I have been able to, and was blessed enough to have the means to go to this level of therapy.
Yeah.
To then be able to do that work, to learn the things that I learned, and then be able to walk through the fire and then be able to bring back buckets of water for those who are still in the flames.
Yeah.
That's a gift. That's something that I don't take lightly. And I'm very grateful that I was blessed with. So you can look at the ways in which you've been victimized and remain a victim, or you can look at those as an opportunity to learn and grow and become stronger in ways that people who were blessed to have parents that loved themselves, loved each other, and loved their children and instilled that in them, right? They're going to have a leg up in some ways, but they're also going to then step into a world that is not that loving and then be struggling in certain ways because, I don't know, right? So there's all that. And I think that, to a point you were making earlier, mental illness is absolutely something that every single person on the planet struggles with. Some people, if you were blessed enough to have that kind of incredible unicorn of a family, you might not be struggling with self-love on that same level, but you might be still struggling with other things.
Correct.
You might not have a full-blown need for a root canal, but you're still dealing with colds and flus along the way that you might struggle with and that you need to deal with.
Yeah.
And I am firmly convinced that, and this is why, having gone through the journey I've gone through and kind of assessed all of that, what is mental illness, what is mental health, and what is everything else that we deal with in this world, I am very convinced that everything that we struggle with as a human species murder and rape and theft and war and greed and, all of the darkness, the shadow of what it means to be a human. The things that we're struggling with now in large scale, right, as a world, all of that would be eradicated if we could just help heal everyone's heart and mind. So like if there's one...
That's how you end the book, actually,
Yes.
with that very thought.
If there's one thing that we could all fight for that would actually literally fix all of the other things, you got to go upstream. Well, where's the source of all of these problems? It's a broken heart and it's a broken mind. Zelensky and Putin and Biden and all of these people that are, subjects in all of this chaos that's going on currently right now. And regardless of where you stand in the political spectrum, this is what's happening, right? We have major conflict that we're on the doorstep of World War III. Well, that would not be happening right now if we had much more sane, healed, healthy minds that were the leaders of these countries. Unfortunately, we don't. Yeah. And part of that is because we have only gotten to really understanding what this is, mental illness, in the last 10 years. Freud was scratching the surface when he started to unpack this. Jung, I think, was actually really the man. Like if you go and look at what he and he admits that he was building off of what Freud started, but Freud was still kind of lost in a lot of his weird hypotheses and things, which there was still some validity to. But Jung really started getting to the root of the shadow self and understanding that we need to love that part of ourselves. But how do you do that if you are still judging yourself? And by the way, that means, and like I talk about in the book, my therapist's talking to me and saying, well, you need to forgive yourself. You were doing the best you could with the tools and understanding you had at the time, which is true. So it's like, okay, so I am worthy of forgiving myself. Oh, wait a minute. But if that's true of me, that means that's true of my mom and my dad and my stepdad and everyone else that has abused me in my life and everyone else who's abused anyone else in this world. I mean, this is one, to use a very extreme example, but it's very easy for us to look at, let's say, terrorists, people that literally strap bombs to themselves and walk into markets and blow themselves up and kill dozens, if not hundreds of innocent civilians, right? It's very easy to look at that person and feel the anger and the hate that comes with that anger and dehumanize them and vilify them and they're monsters. And by the way, monstrous act, 100%. There is nothing that is a given. It is an evil act. But that human that did that, if we are to actually, as the Bible calls us to do, to love our enemies and pray for our persecutors and walk a mile in another's shoes, like that kind of stuff, you have to take a moment and go, okay, well, hang on a second. Yes, what they did was absolutely wrong, and that should not be, and there should be consequences to these things and so on and so forth. But that person who did that, they weren't twisting their mustache, this Machiavelli type of, I can't wait to go and do this evil thing. They were convinced that what they were doing was the holiest of acts. Yes. Because they were programmed to believe that was the holiest, best thing that they could do since they were a child. Yeah. And so we have got to get ourselves back to that. If we are ever to finally actually have peace on this earth, it cannot constantly be eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It can't be pendulum constantly swinging back and forth and retribution after retribution, which is unfortunately what continues to go on. We have got to be willing to say, yes, we were done wrong by this group of people, and we will hold them accountable for that, but we are willing to acknowledge that they were doing that because they were misled and they were wrong, but they are still children of God.
Yeah, well, most wars now end not with that. They end with with both sides still believing they were right. They just agree to stop fighting until the next time. And I come from Northern Ireland.
And you can talk a lot about that.
I can talk a lot about that. We've decided not to kill each other for a
while. They're just taking a break. They haven't stopped hating each other. They're just taking a break.
But actually, I want to come back a bit because you've talked about trauma and you've talked about being in the fire. Nowadays, people talk about, there's so much, everyone's had trauma and sometimes it's very minor. Just give people a taste of your childhood, because it's important that you're not some person that what you had was very, very unusual. It was very extreme. It was. I mean,
I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know how unusual it is.
Well, it was pretty rough. Now,
yeah,
I mean,
it was. Listen, I had a mother who was very psychologically and even somewhat physically, but mostly psychologically abused by her mother. Okay. All of us, every person is still dealing with some version of their generational trauma. Even if you had great parents, your parents still had some trauma. You might be able to half-life that, but you still get some remnants of that. You still got some remnants of whatever your parents experienced at the hands of their parents, and so on and so forth, go all the way up the line, right? Some lineages are far better, far more full of love. Others are not. And I would say, I think that it's the exception and not the rule that you get the really great experience at this point. And that's because there's been a lot of pain and a lot of hurt in the world for a long, long, long time, okay? My grandmother, my mother's mom, she experienced whatever she experienced as a child. That led into her own psychological mental and emotional illness. She handed that on to my mom and her siblings in a very destructive way. My mother was a brilliant, beautiful, talented, charming, dynamic, could have been Fortune 500 CEO, first female president of the United States. Like, she had the capability and she knew it. And people throughout her life even told her she was very special. The problem is that when you abuse a child, if you abuse a child that, let's say, is a pretty normal child that doesn't have all of that capability, it's still very destructive to that child. But their now ability to pass that damage on is lessened because they are not, let's say, quite as powerful as an individual. My mother was a very powerful individual. And so the broken version of her was very powerfully broken. And so me and my sisters, although my sisters, when I wrote the book, I had them read it before anybody else because I wanted them to kind of proofread it in a lot of ways and be like, hey, tell me if I'm off in these ways. And it was interesting because there were some things I wrote and they were like, that never happened. And I was like, what do you mean that never happened? They go, we don't remember that ever happening.
Yeah.
I was like, that's interesting because I very much believe it, but I wanted to be as accurate and as fair as I could. And then there were other things where my sisters were like, I can't tell I don't know if that happened or not because you're saying it happened to you, but that didn't happen to me. But the point being, regardless, my mother and my stepfather were both very intelligent, very talented, dynamic individuals, but both struggled deeply with mental illness. And that was then put onto me and my sisters. And, when you have my stepfather, his type of abuse really came out of a kind of a level of perfectionism where the bar was infinitely high. There was no way, because he really was he was a genius human being. Like, he was a prodigy violinist and guitar player, piano player, architect, like so many incredible things. But that was because he had a father that was cracking a whip on him all the time. He was the youngest person to ever play with the San Diego Philharmonic on violin.
Wow.
But that's because he had a father that was like, more, and so then that creates this version of him that if he becomes an adult, then when he's trying to parent me and my sisters, it's of his version of cracking a whip on us. Nothing was ever good enough. My mother, there was not a perfectionism in that the bar was infinitely high. She was a borderline personality narcissist. And so with a borderline personality, it's not even that you have a bar that's too high. It's that you have a bar, or not even a bar, you have a target that's constantly moving. So there's no real pleasing someone with borderline personality because you think the target's here, but then their mood shifts and all of a sudden it's like, nope, you missed it. Nope, you missed it. Nope, you missed it, right? So that was incredibly damaging, but I will say this. Yes, this was a part of my trauma. And by the way, and there's other things I talk about in the book, Hollywood is a very traumatic industry.
Yeah.
Growing up, my school, I was bullied relentlessly in school. There was so much trauma there. And then I didn't have parents that I was safe enough to go and talk to about that trauma. So all that just kept building up and building up and building. I mean, there was all manner of ways that, it led me to where I ultimately fell apart and then ultimately led to the book. But even though that was my specific journey, the amount of people that read the book and have a totally different journey.
Yes.
Had a parent, that it's like, it wasn't my mom, it was my dad. It wasn't my dad, it was my grandparent. It wasn't my grandparent, it was my teacher. It was whatever it is. They find themselves in the pages of this book. So it's not even specifically that you had to have gone through that exact trauma. Trauma in and of itself. And then, by the way, I think this is something that's worth discussing, because I think that for a long time, we really did, it was important, particularly as men. It was like, stand up straight, stiff upper lip, whatever.
Strong.
Be strong, right? All of these things, which, by the way, there is some value to these things,
yes.
right? We cannot just fall apart. We have got to recognize that we are very strong and capable, but we also have to communicate what we're struggling with and get it out. And as men, we need to do that more and more, because we have been conditioned not to do that, but I think that's getting better.
Conditioned in America, by the way. Check out Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
Men say nothing.
100%.
Ever.
100%.
But in fact, there's a TV series at the moment on Hulu about Northern Ireland, and the title of it is called
Don't say anything.
Say Nothing.
Yeah, great. That's healthy.
That's our people.
But I think that it's important to recognize that, it used to be that, even talking about something like PTSD, for example, to say it in regard to anything other than
war,
a soldier coming back from war, was a disrespect to the soldiers coming back from war, right? But the reality is, it's just not true.
Yeah.
Almost anyone can deal with some version of PTSD, because trauma is not just an on-off switch. It's a spectrum. It is. There are levels of trauma. So yes, you could have this level of trauma because you were literally in a firefight and you killed people and you saw your fellow soldiers die next to you. That's a level of trauma.
Yeah.
Being assaulted sexually, a woman or man even being sexually assaulted, that's a level of trauma. Being in a massive car accident or something, these are all various. And then there's the death by 1,000 cuts, where you're growing up in a household that's trauma. It's not this level of trauma all the time. It's a million little traumas, or even mediums, or even sometimes larger traumas, depending on what you deal with at home. So we have got to be willing to allow people that grace in, like, well, your trauma is not really trauma. No, it's still trauma. No. It's a matter of going and working through it with a professional. And sometimes that requires medication, and sometimes that doesn't. Sometimes that requires going away to a place, and sometimes that doesn't. But I think that it's important that we recognize that everyone is struggling at least a little bit, if not a lot of it, and giving grace to everyone.
No, I would have been very much what you were saying about, there's only one kind of PTSD, but actually it's not true, it's not true. Like we had lunch with someone recently who was a Jewish person living in LA, and after October 7 was heavily involved in sort of counteracting the UCLA encampments and that, and was there when the riot happened there and all that. And for weeks afterwards, he couldn't sleep at night. And he went, he said, I went to a therapist and they diagnosed him with PTSD. And he was very, very reluctant to accept that diagnosis, because he felt it was doing a disservice to the people who'd actually been through October 7. But he had to admit, that he was suffering from PTSD, from reliving it, or from the protests, etc. And so you're right that the little bits of trauma are not to be
to be dismissed.
No, not to be downplayed.
No, not at all.
And even even the kind of the organic traumas, people, your mother dies, your father dies, your relative dies. Like, that happens to everybody and affects people in different ways. For some, it's kind of fine in a way. But for others, I even remember my own mother's death, and she was, obviously she was fabulous and all of that. So, and she was a good age, like she was 86. And it was like, I kind of describe it as like it was an existential crisis. Like the world suddenly didn't have her in it.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary and shocking. And I talked to somebody recently, and I was very interesting. She said that her father had died, and I was sympathizing with her, and she was saying, thank you for being so kind about my father. And she said, I'm so embarrassed looking back, she said, when people's parents died, when fathers died. And she said, I would say to them, I'm so sorry about your father. And she said, She said, I had no idea. I had no idea what had just happened to them, you know? Until it happened to her, she didn't really get it. Yeah. How big that was, how huge it was. So you're right about that actually PTSD and trauma, nobody escapes that, no matter how nice your childhood was.
No, I mean, everyone is very susceptible to it. And again, it doesn't mean that we just indulge everyone in a constant state of victimhood.
Yes.
This is a massive problem that we're dealing with right now, right?
Yeah.
It's like, the victimhood Olympics, like who can get to the bottom fastest and stay there.
We spoke about it last week on the podcast. Journalists at The Guardian were being offered counselling after Trump won. Yeah. And it's like, I happen to know someone at The Guardian who was kidnapped in Iraq, right?
And that's trauma.
That's trauma, right?
He survived.
Right? So I know someone who's... So I'm just thinking, like, there was a result of an election and you're being offered counselling for
democratic
trauma.
election that no one disputes the results. And you need trauma counselling.
Yeah, so the Victim Olympics, definitely I went through a phase of thinking about the Victim Olympics, but I think there's more to it than just, as you say, the soldiers coming from war. Yeah. But the results of election are not traumatic.
Well, okay. I will add this. I think that it is, though I also find it somewhat absurd, right? But I think there's another side to this, which is actually the much more absurd or nefarious part of this, which is, let's say, and given the amount of videos that I've seen of Harris supporters who are having very real emotional meltdowns post-election, it's easy for us, particularly if you weren't a Harris voter, which I don't think any of us were.
I don't think so. I think we're safe. I think you're in a safe enough spot here.
But it's easy. She wants some water.
Sorry, just some water there. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
It's easy for us in the Trump voting camp to look at a reaction like that and go, wow, that looks crazy, right? That looks crazy. Particularly since even in 2020, when one might argue the results of that election are still very shady, there wasn't, there were definitely upset people, but there wasn't this slew of videos that, at least that I saw, of this type of unhinged, emotionally unhinged reaction.
Yes.
But I would say, as opposed to us looking at those people who are having these reactions and having a judgment toward them, I think it's more accurate and a better use of our energy and judgment to point that toward the people that are responsible for having created a situation where those people feel that the literal world is ending.
Correct.
And that is the responsibility of the
media.
Democratic Party and the legacy media, who were quite literally brainwashing the entire world, but specifically the United States, into believing that Trump is Hitler, that he's the king of the Nazis, that everyone who supports him is a Nazi. He's going to take away all women's rights, all gay rights, all minority rights, everything. This is the end of the world. We have to stop it. And I have a lot of empathy personally for a lot of these people, including even people that might work at The Guardian who feel like they needed some mental health days. Do I think that I still find it to be like, guys, you should be smart enough to... Also, it's not even your country.
Yeah.
Right? Like, which is not to say the United States isn't the largest domino in all of it, at least at this point. So I understand that it does affect everyone. But... So yes, it seems absurd, and it is absurd on some level, but they are in that place because their own publication, as well as all of the New York Times and Washington Post and the Atlantic and all of those publications CNN. And all of, save Fox News, all of the legacy media was all pumping everyone with this craziness. So again, I hear you and I agree with you, but I think it's far better for us to try to have as much empathy as we can with these folks and say, listen, it's a bummer that you're feeling this way because you're building your emotional state off of actual lies. Yeah. And it's hard for them to, as they say, it's easier to convince someone of a lie than to convince them that they have been lied to. So it's a very difficult process for any one of us to try and convince anyone on the other side.
Well, it's like when I started in journalism, I was taught journalism by Phelim McAleer. Is
that how you met?
That's how. No, well, we met at a political conference, and he was a journalist, and I was a girl looking for trouble, whatever,
I found it.
And I found, listen, he looked like a terrorist at the time, by the way. He was hairy up here and quite disheveled looking, and he had these very, very curly hair. Look at that, what I've done to him. Yeah. All the curl is gone out of his life. Yeah. Oh yeah, very, very smooth now. But I remember Phelim saying, and we went to live in Romania, and we lived there for 7 years, and Phelim was the Financial Times correspondent for Romania and Bulgaria, and I was just kind of the lady who lunched until I became a journalist. But he taught me to become a journalist. And I do remember one thing he said very early on, which I always, and it's exactly feeding into what you're saying, which was, if it's not in the newspaper, it didn't happen. Because, and I find that with, for example, with October 7th, which we've spent a lot of time on, and we've created a play and based on verbatim testimony of people we interviewed in Israel in November. But we were like, when October 7th happened, we were in Ireland, and I literally had that experience where I'm talking about October 7th to people, and they're like, what now? What was that now? What happened? There was something, and all they ever heard about and all they wanted to talk about was electricity being turned off in Gaza. They literally didn't know that this massacre had happened, that there'd been a party and young people who were at a peace party, by the way, had been massacred. And when you see that in real time, when you watch that in real time, it's quite spooky actually. And you do realize the disservice that the media have done. Exactly. That's a really, really good point.
It's a very good point.
It's a very good point because it's very easy and lazy, and we like to be lazy and all of that, to just go for, isn't this hilarious? Would you look at your woman there having a complete meltdown, going completely nuts, as opposed to, listen, this person is living, they haven't heard this. They haven't heard any of this information.
No, actually, it's even, you're correct. It's even, if you want to be completely correct, they're right to be traumatized. If Hitler has just been elected...
Yes, it is the worst. It is the end of the world.
There's nothing else matters. Yeah. There is actually nothing else matters.
Except for then when you find that those same people who said that the world has ended and Hitler has become the president.
Going to visit him.
And then the following day they're going, well, we should go and talk to him.
Yes. No, but just to get back to these people who are upset, of course, if they were told Hitler is going to be elected, if Hitler's elected, I mean, this is why there's been 2 assassination attempts on Trump, because...
That's what you do.
That's what you do. It's a moral imperative.
Bonhoeffer. You're a version of Bonhoeffer.
I not that we should go down this rabbit hole, but
rabbit hole.
I don't think either of those assassinations or assassination attempts were merely a singular unhinged individual who was acting out of the fear that they were induced into because of what the media was saying. I think that there are some much more evil things at play with both the attempt, in Butler and also the dude in the golf course. Florida. Yeah. And if you just a cursory look at the details of either of those things and their connections and the fact that the FBI still hasn't gotten into the phones of this lone gunman kid who somehow got around all of the Secret Service, and his entire apartment was scrubbed clean. There was nothing in there. He has no friends or family that have been on camera that have discussed any this is not but
that's right.
To your point, if in fact it was just, let's say, these people acting out of that, you would understand that too. Yeah. Because if people are very impressionable, we're all very impressionable. Yes. One of the worst things you can do is have the hubris to believe that you're not impressionable. Yeah. That somehow, no one can get one over on me.
Not me.
No one. I'm not biting on any lies. I know everything.
I'm different.
And honestly, and this is one of the things that I find to be most tragic about where we're at, which is like I have friends. I mean, I guess that term might be a little gray. I was going to say I have friends that have kind of disowned me because of my political stance. And listen, I've always been, and again, not super closeted, but I mean, walking a thin line in the industry,
of course.
But I've always maintained being a reasonably conservative libertarian. I mean, that's what I've basically always been.
I seem to remember going to your house about 2017, and you were not a Trumper.
I wasn't.
No, you were not. Like you were.
I was very vocally not about Trump. In both the 2008, 2016, and the 2020 election. And by the way, even in this election, I was not going to. I wanted Bobby Kennedy. I still think that of all the options that we had, and there were really only 3 potential, really truly viable. I mean, other people that ran, but like they were never ever going to have a chance. Bobby Kennedy was the first real independent candidate since Ross Perot that legitimately had a chance if, and only if, enough moderates or non-moderates, but if enough people on both sides of the aisle were willing to reject the lie that we have all been fed for far too long. And by the way, it's one of the most nefarious lies because it's one of the only things that both parties agree on, which is a vote for a third party is a wasted vote. We've all been conditioned to believe this lie. And so therefore, so many people looked at Bobby and they go, I really like him, but he's never going to win. It's like, well, hang on a second. If enough people really like him and all vote, he wins. And then we can get out of this duopoly nonsense. And listen, I understand some of the issues that people have with Bobby. I've done enough research into him and actually know him personally at this point. And I think the guy is just awesome. Is he a perfect human being? Absolutely not. Nobody's a perfect human being. But I'll tell you what, I still think, and I said this in my Instagram post that I put out, when he started to run, and it was really Trump, Harris, and well, at that point, it might have still been Biden.
Yeah.
I think it might have still. Okay,
right.
That's a whole other thing.
Yes.
But I was like, y'all, there's one person of these 3 people that actually, I believe, has the moral integrity that you really want, the eloquence, the understanding, the intellect, the prowess, the political understanding. The guy's family's literally been in this for so long. His father and uncle were both whacked by our own government, guys. And he still, by the way, doesn't walk around with this weird chip on his shoulder and I'm going to destroy people. He doesn't. He understands because he's gone to hell and back with his own heroin addiction and all these things. The guy literally goes to AA every single day.
Wow.
Like he's a dedicated human being. Like he really understands it. And so I made a post about it and I was like, This is the guy, not Trump and not Harris or Biden at the time. These are not who we should be voting for. It should be Bobby. Kamala and the Democrats made it very, very clear that we were never going to have a chance to vote for Bobby. It wasn't Trump and the Republicans. It was Harris and Biden and the Democrats that sued him to keep him off all the ballots and do all this crazy stuff. So he didn't stand a chance. And then Trump, having almost died, I believe, and I think a lot of people can corroborate this. There was a very marked difference in his energy and in his spirit.
Yes.
He was humbled.
Yes.
And as one can only be when you are that close to dying.
Yes.
Totally.
When it's this, literally this bullet, right? And it was on the heels of that he realized that this is far bigger than just him and his ego. Although there's still a lot of that involved because this Donald Trump we're talking
We've
about.
met him.
Right?
Yes, we've met him.
But that's why, right after that, of all the phone calls he could make, he called Bobby. And he goes, listen, we've got to do this. And I want to do this with you. And Bobby still, by the way, he could have done it right then. He's like, no, I'm still going to run. I appreciate the phone call, and I do want to make this. I'm still trying to. I'm glad that you're finally on board with wanting to make the country healthy again, not just great again, but healthy again. But I'm going to stay in this race. And he ultimately went, couldn't do it anymore, dropped out, and the coalition of dreams has been formed, and not just with Bobby, with Tulsi, with Vivek, with Elon, with JD, with Ron Paul, like all of these people. I can't remember how we even got onto what we were talking about here. What was the...
Well, that you weren't a Trumper. Well, I remembered you not being a Trumper. I didn't, in 2017, 2018, I didn't know that it had continued into 2020.
Oh, I remember. I was talking about friends who are no longer my friends. That's right. So at any rate, listen, I got flack when I first came out and started stumping for Bobby because obviously he was, even though he wasn't a Republican and he was a Democrat, he wasn't the anointed choice that was
right.
Kamala Harris, right? And everyone was like, you shouldn't be doing that, and blah, blah, blah. But people still gave me a little bit of grace in that because I'm not voting for Trump.
At least he's a Democrat.
At least he's not Trump.
Yes.
Right? And then when Tulsi and Bobby asked me to moderate their town hall, I knew at that point, well, if I do that, I am now officially coming out of this closet and I am endorsing Donald Trump. And I knew I was going to vote for him anyway, because if that means I get Bobby in there to head up the HHS and to clean up all of our pharmaceuticals and agriculture and all of these things that are in desperate need of being fixed, then, and with, again, all of the other things and secure, listen, if you were to do, like how Pepsi and Coke back in the day, Pepsi did the Pepsi challenge.
Yes.
And you were to drink both of these things. You had no idea which one it was. If you took both presidents' names and faces or the candidates' names and faces off of the ballot and you just looked at policy, just policy.
No
almost
brainer.
Anyone would go, well, this.
Yeah, no brainer.
This. Our borders are out of control.
Yeah.
But again, part of it was all of the issues of the Biden and Harris administration were being downplayed, if not talked about at all, by the legacy media that is a propaganda arm of them, right? So there's all manner of issues that are going on, which is why, ultimately, I have friends who have chosen to not be my friends anymore, right? And it's a bummer. But
I think I wrote that to you. I think when I texted you, because I want to say what I said in my text to you. I said, that now, in the world we're living in, at this particular period in time, there's so few things that are inspirational. And I said 2 things have happened recently to me that I find inspirational. One was Elon Musk when the rocket came and was collected by the 2 arms, and I thought. And of course it didn't happen. I bet every school child in the world wasn't watching that, and they should have been watching that because it was extraordinary. And the second one was you coming out very publicly and saying, this is what I'm doing now. This is where I'm going now. This is who I am. I'm voting for these people. And I thought it was really, because I think there's and I said to you, I said, maybe you should keep a notebook. I think maybe I said that to you. Keep a notebook, keep a note on what people do to you, because maybe someday you might write about it. Could you give me for instance, obviously you're not going to give particular names, but I'm just curious, because I'm just wondering, do people write to you and say, I'm done with you? Is it as childish as that?
There's a lot of strangers on social media that go out of their way to tell me what a horrible person I am and unfollowed and whatever. It's the most childish behavior. Honestly, and I've tried to explain to people, I go, I don't think people realize, all you're doing is showing that you're actually not someone who wants everyone to win. I want everyone to win. I might be wrong. I'm willing to acknowledge that I might be wrong. I am voting with the best of my knowledge and all of the research that I've done, right? But I think I have at least enough humility to recognize that I could be wrong. I can't say the same for people that are that I've experienced on the other side, voting on the other side, which is really something, because for years and years and years and years, they have been voting for candidates that I think have been incredibly dangerous and detrimental to this country. But not once did I ever look at them and say, I can't believe
I'm not talking to you anymore.
I would never,
you're not coming to my Thanksgiving.
No. But the fact that whoever they are, and by the way, I'll get to that in a second, but the fact that whether they're total strangers on the internet or actual friends or former friends or whatever, the fact that they have believed all of this stuff, hook, line, and sinker, that Trump is this rapist, felon, blah, 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 blah. Guys, just pull on those threads a little bit. Just pull on them a little bit. And you'll find that this is not what is being painted to be. Again, I've made it very clear. Is he the paragon of morality? No,
definitely
but neither is Kamala Harris. So what are we talking about? That cancels each other out. So we're not talking about the human morality element, let's say. Take that off the table. Look at the 4 years that he was a leader. Look at the 4 years that she was a leader. Look at that. Pepsi challenged that. Yeah. Clearly, there's a winner in that regard. Yeah. And then, of course, people go, well, that was Obama's economy that he inherited and blah, 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 blah. Sorry, but it's way more complicated than that, number one. Number two, the policies that he's trying to enact right now are absolutely the things that we need to be doing. And even people that are more liberal have watched the goalposts literally shift. I mean, Bill Maher talks about it.
Yes.
He has not shifted.
Yeah.
The lines have shifted, right?
Yeah.
And he's at least willing to call that out. There's a lot of people that are liberal that don't really believe in like hardcore DEI and wokeness or whatever, but they're like, but I gotta keep kind of cheering for it. Otherwise, I'm going to get canceled, and I don't want to get canceled.
Well,
and I can't vote for anybody other than Kamala because that's what we got to do. And right?
I mean, they don't believe in open borders. They don't believe in. Deep
down, they don't.
No, they don't.
But they do to the extent that I think a lot of people feel the need to look. There are two main differentiators between people who voted for Harris and voted for Trump, which are the biggest being, do you actually believe in the idea that our government is somehow this two-dimensional idea of the government, right? Which is there's a Republican Party and there's a Democrat Party, and one of those two is more evil than the other, and they're constantly at odds. But one of them is always the enemy, right? Okay. The reality is that's not true. There are horrible Democrats and there are horrible Republicans. There is a duopoly that sits at the top of all of it. McConnell and Pelosi might as well be the same person as far as I'm concerned. They are not interested in the benefit or the well-being of the American people. They are interested in their own well-being and perpetuating the military-industrial complex, the pharmaceutical-industrial complex, the big ag, big food, big everything, because they're making money, all the insider trading, no term limits, all that stuff.
Yep.
That is what we're battling. People that voted for Trump, I think, have a much better understanding that the guy is not he's not Orange Jesus, but he's not a part of the corrupted duopoly. So whether like it or lump it, we got to get out of that.
That's why they hate him.
If the Democrats would have run Bobby, which they never would have done because he would have gotten away from the corruption. That's why he would never be given a chance. That's why Tulsi Gabbard was not going to get a chance. That's why in 2016, Bernie was going to be the guy. And as much as I disagree with so many things that Bernie's about, I actually think he at least believes what he says. Yeah. I think the guy actually does care about human beings. He just thinks that it's going to be socialist means that get us back to that. And I think that's wrong. No. But I think that if he were given the opportunity to be president, which will never happen at this point, but if he had been, he would have been faced with a lot of reality and he would have changed a lot of his tune and policy based on learning a lot more of what was going on. But the Democrats were never going to let him be president either because he wasn't just going to be their puppet. And Hillary was. And that's why Hillary got the nomination. And that's why Biden got in there. And that's why ultimately Kamala got in there, right? Yes. So that is, to me, most people that voted for Kamala still look at her and the platitudes and the niceties and the and the laugh and all of the things, and they go, see, she's not saying people are retarded, and she's not saying these bully words. It's like, y'all, you've got to grow up a little bit. Like you got to understand, like, you're good people. I understand that you are also want the best for this country, but you have to look beyond the matrix. You are being foiled by the matrix. And Kamala is a representation of someone who is very much a part of what that is. And so that, along with then recognizing, if you recognize that, this is the other part is recognizing, therefore, are you getting your information from the legacy media because you still believe it's telling you the truth? Or do you not get your information from the legacy media because you know that they're lying to you? These are the factors. Do you believe in the duopoly and that the legacy media is a propaganda arm of that? Or do you not?
So Kennedy's now in the cabinet.
Yeah. Well, he's nominated.
He's
correct.
Still
got to get voted in, right?
Yeah, he's got to get confirmed.
That's still going to be a fight because there's a lot of rhinos. There's a lot of McConnell type senators and obviously Democrats that do not want that to happen. And I think there's a lot of people that are really terrified.
So we were,
why do you think they're terrified?
Of RFK?
I think that we have all been lied to for, I think there's been lies that have been perpetrated and perpetuated for probably since the beginning of this country, but acutely since World War II. I think Eisenhower, literally in his speech as he was leaving office, made a point of warning us, the American people, of the military-industrial complex. He said it to the nation. That, along with the CIA and the FBI gaining more and more and more power, right? Creating essentially what is the deep state, which a lot, again, if you're on the left, they're like, deep state, conspiracy theory, blah, blah, blah. Guys, wake up. Like, wake up. This is not checkers. This is chess. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on. And I think that, aside from, by the way, things like JFK and Bobby Kennedy and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and all of these other people that were assassinated at the hands of, I believe, the CIA and the FBI or whoever was involved. I don't think this is like random people. This is our own government doing these very horrible things, going and, by the way, being a part of all these coups in all of these countries for decades and decades and decades to in order to enforce our powers around the world. It happened in Ukraine. Zelensky is there because the United States got in there and cooed the guy that was there already, that was more sympathetic to Russia. Like, this is a thing that's been going on for a long time. So on the military side and all of that stuff, there's a lot of people that are very nervous that those things are going to be exposed. But guys, the pandemic, like Pfizer and Moderna and Fauci, all of these vaccine, the vaccine, non-vaccine that we were all shamed into getting, basically late night hosts like Kimmel and Colbert were mocking people.
Yeah.
You should die then. You should die if you don't do this. I mean, that's the level. And by the way, and what bummed me out is like, I know Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert deep down are good dudes. Like, I think that they bought into this lie. Mm-hmm. There's so many of them. This is just the stuff we were talking about before before we started recording. Our food is poisoned. It's poisoned. The exact products that we get in Fruit Loops. That's a great example. It's in the news right now because they went to
Canada.
Finally, they had a whole thing in front of Congress, and they were like, we and the United States, Kellogg's is a U.S. company, and we are being given a whole bunch of ingredients that are deemed poisonous and illegal in all these other countries around the world. And yet they give them to us.
No, they're not deemed. Well, sorry. So they're not used in somewhere like Canada, but we spoke to someone recently about that, and Canada has 16 million people or 20 million people, whatever it has. You can use non-artificial dyes for a smaller population. If you want to provide Fruit Loops for the population of America, you can't create enough blue dye from natural blueberries for 300 million people. You're going to have to use artificial dyes. And there's no evidence, there's studies about what happened rats. For example, I think it was the red dye or the blue dye. We talked to this person.
There's a red and a blue and a yellow and everything.
But there's one where it causes some kind of non-malignant tumors in rats. But this person was saying, if you transfer that to humans, you'd have to eat 186,000 coloured jelly beans a day
every day
to get the same amount of dye they were giving those rats. There's a lot of, I don't want to use the word misinformation, but there's a lot of, look, not every artificial ingredient is dangerous. And I think this is a movement now that there's a possibility of overreaching here.
Listen, I'm not someone, I believe, as a libertarian, I believe that we should all be given the option, should we want. If you want to go put that stuff in your body, then go put that stuff in your body. But I don't believe that we're being given informed consent at all. We're not being given a truly conformed consent about these vaccines, about lots of different medication, about lots of the food that we're putting into our bodies, the drinks that we're putting into our bodies. They're absolutely, I don't want to get into the weeds on those particular dyes, but I will say that aside, high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is absolutely the result of us coming out of the Great Depression. We were subsidizing farmers, right? We were trying to get the agriculture back up and going, and they started subsidizing farmers, and they started subsidizing corn, and a lot of corn. And that corn was like, well, there's more corn here than anybody can eat. What do we do with all the rest of this corn? Well, let's use the corn to feed all of our livestock, even though they're not supposed to eat that because they can't really digest that stuff, which is why we have to then give them all manner of antibiotics and vaccinations so that they don't get sick, which are all going into the cows, and then that gets into our milk and gets into our meat. And then more than that, they're like, well, we still have too much corn. What do we do with all this corn? Well, we can grind this up and we can turn it into ethanol and we can turn it into high fructose corn syrup. And we can put high fructose corn syrup into everything. And guess what happens with high fructose corn syrup? It makes you more hungry, which makes you more addicted to the food.
I think I agree that's what's happened. I would argue that it happened for a different reason, was that fat was evil. Remember, like, we grew up.
But why?
Because of bad science.
Do you think that was accidental?
Look, I mean,
because I don't think that was an accident at all.
I think it was accidental. I think it was bad science. I think it's not. There's no such thing as the corn industry. There's the food industry, and they don't care whether they feed you fat or whether they feed you high fructose corn syrup. They just want to make money off feeding you, right? So science said. I think it was Eisenhower who had a heart attack and he wanted his Surgeon General to say, what caused this? And it wasn't the 20 cigarettes he was smoking a day, of course, because that could not be. And the Surgeon General said, it's a high-fat diet.
Right.
So suddenly, remember,
we growing up. Do you know how they came to that conclusion?
Bad science.
The sugar industry paid that. That study was done because the sugar industry, who knew very well that carbohydrates are sugars, so they were protecting their own asses, and they sent him to go do a study, and he went to a lot of different places around the world, and he concluded that the heart healthiest diets are ones that have little to no fat and high levels of grains. And that's how we got our food pyramid. And it was a lie from the beginning, and it wasn't an accidental lie. It was an intentional lie.
Well, I mean, look, I suppose the point that comes out of all of this is that scientists and experts, you cannot believe a word they say now. That is the problem.
But this is what I'm saying.
Yes, no, and I'm saying to you, I think you're wrong about certain things, but unfortunately, I cannot point to credible experts who are not tainted, who are not. I can't say. You can't. Science has no credibility anymore.
I completely agree.
And
unfortunately, though, that's not because of the overwhelming amount of scientists or even doctors. The overwhelming amount of scientists and doctors, unfortunately, are they are also themselves very manipulatable, right?
Of course.
And they, like with the pandemic, they went to the Lancet, which is supposed to be the Bible.
Yes.
And the Lancet said, not only is it all this good, but ivermectin's bad, and don't touch these things. And the CDC and the FDA, that's horse dewormer, blah, blah, blah. And shocker, all of that turned out to be manipulation, intentional manipulation. So all of these doctors.
But all the institutions let people down. I remember a doctor telling me at the beginning of the pandemic, if you're looking for good information, go to the Mayo Clinic site. And my one thing with the Mayo Clinic site that I just think tells you every last thing you need to know about the Mayo Clinic site is that they used to do the numbers, the aggregate numbers of people dying of COVID all over the place or whatever. The number of people, and I can tell you it's the same today as it was then, the number of people who died of COVID in China is smaller than the number of people who died of COVID in Ireland. Now, there's a little bit of a different population there between those two countries, as you might know yourself there now. Yeah. And the Mayo Clinic didn't think it was important to put an asterisk beside China and say, well, China lie about everything. Yeah. So obviously we don't believe their number. They didn't do it. Instead of that, they represented the number like it was real. But I think, it's funny, the RFK thing. I mean, our personal problem, I have a problem with RFK, but my personal problem with RFK is that he's wrong about something that I do know about.
Which is what?
Fracking. So he came out very, very strongly about fracking, against fracking, saying it's poisoning the water. There is an outrageous amount of data to prove him completely wrong.
Well, listen.
And no, but he. So it's just interesting, and I don't know, and I need to check.
Sure.
Has he come out and said, by the way, I was really wrong about fracking? Because I would love to hear that. And it does give me pause because he was very strong. And very vociferous about it. Yes. And I thought,
I get that.
How do you know about? No, but it's something we know about because it's kind of funny.
That thing that's very measurable.
That thing that they say about, like, you read the New York.
Made a whole film about it.
Yeah. They make like you read the New York Times, you read an article about something you know about, and you're like, that article's wrong. but I believe this article over here. So with us, that's definitely my RFK thing, because I don't know enough about vaccines. I definitely don't. But I do know about fracking, because we spent all that time making that documentary, and we know the data. And so that would make me worried, because I don't know why a person would get so invested in a piece of information that's wrong. How did they get?
We all?
Pardon?
I mean, haven't you at some point in your life gotten very invested?
Well, I didn't make
by
public,
being misled about
no,
something?
but I didn't make public statements.
Well, you probably did.
Well,
but
the point, or what I just would say is this. He himself has said, I am someone who will change my mind when presented with new information. And he has.
Yeah.
Already, multiple times. In fact, what's ironic is that even though that's what we want all of our leaders to be able to do, people were using it against him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like he was talking about abortion, right? So originally, he was of the mind of, listen, I'm not a woman. I'm not going to presume to understand any of that journey. And if there are states that want to have abortions up to full term because they believe that there are exceptions where that's necessary and it's very, very rare or whatever that is, he was less educated on it, and that was his stance. And then after he said that, his wife and Nicole Shanahan, his running partner, and other women in his life came to him and said, hey, we should probably talk about some of this stuff. And then he changed his position on it. He goes, hey, I was under the impression that these late-term abortions were always a necessity and happen very rarely. And I found out that that is not the case. So I am no longer in favor of that. And then, of course, people go, flip-flopper, blah, blah, blah. No. He is being willing to adjust.
It's funny.
So I believe,
And Trump
I fully
was the
believe
same.
that if someone, people like yourself or anyone else who understands fracking enough to show him where he might be wrong, he would be absolutely willing to hear that and adjust accordingly.
Problem, the big facet of the Democratic machine actually is, like, Joe Rogan endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016. But then because he went slightly off the reservation and, had a couple of opinions that weren't Democratic orthodoxy, Democrats wouldn't go on his show.
Oh, I know.
To their own detriment, by the way, in the last election. So he just slightly... If Joe Rogan went right, it was because the Democrats sent him there.
Well, it's the same thing we were talking about before. It's like what Bill Maher talks about. Joe and Bill may have adjusted a little bit based on new information, right? Yeah. But by and large, they are still the same human beings. Yeah. Practicing the same types of logic and reason that they have always per who they are. Yeah. The line keeps going farther and farther and farther left into this, I know it's not the original definition of the term woke, but what woke is considered now with all of its, kind of all the baggage that comes along with it, to the point where we're even having a conversation about a biologically born male who might identify as a woman now. By the way, if you're an adult and you want to go to that place, I don't personally think that anyone's born in the wrong body, but if that's your decision as an adult and you're not affecting anyone else's rights, fucking go for it. Yeah. Live your life.
Do it.
But don't for a second try to look at biology and say, and also I should be able to compete against biological women. Yes. Are you crazy?
Or that I am a woman.
Well, yes, but again, let's work our way. Let's work our way backward from the most absurd.
Yes.
And one might argue them saying I am a biological woman is the most absurd. You might. But I think it's even easier to start the argument at there's a reason why we even have two divisions of sports. It's not because the men didn't want to compete with the women.
Yeah.
It's because the women couldn't compete with the men.
They'd get hurt.
And they would get hurt. Yeah. So what are we even talking about? This is insane. It's insane. And so the fact that they're still pushing that, the people like Bill Maher and Joe Rogan go, no, that's crazy. And then the crazy left goes, right wing.
But also right wing, but we're not going to talk to you. We're not going to we're not even going to go and try and persuade you.
We're not going to give you the time of day.
We're not going to try and persuade you or persuade your followers. It's a very, very strange way to try and win an election. We're not going to go over there to persuade those people. It's insane. It's an interesting. I mean, I want to get back, after you endorsed Trump, have you had many people like people who've written to us privately for things we've done saying, I secretly support you. Yeah. But I can't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Famous people or people in the public.
Yeah. I've gotten quite a few.
Tell us who they are.
No, I mean, listen, I hope for their own sake
that they come out,
that they are able to come out. And I say that because I think it's important for the world.
Yeah.
I think the more that people feel capable of living authentically, the more overall the world becomes an authentic place, right? The more we're hiding who we are, the less authentic the world is. And I think that when it comes to reason and logic and rational thought and things like that, and people that I think do congregate under those things, by the way, under left, right, and center, right? There's a lot of things. There's people that on the left that would still consider themselves Democrats that voted for Trump because they recognize that even though they might not like a lot about him, he has policies and is capable of endorsing and figuring out those policies in a way that Kamala wasn't, right? So those things I think tend to fall under logic, reason, and rational thought. And the more of us that can go and boldly stand for that, the more that will become the norm. So and also personally for them, I will say that I would say the last few years leading up to me finally endorsing Trump, which again, wasn't even my intention. I wanted Bobby.
Yeah.
But I still get Bobby now.
Yes,
right?
you do.
So
Yes,
I'm very grateful about that. And that's ultimately what drove so much of what I voted for. But all those other things as well. But for me to finally just not have to walk a razor's edge, for me to just be out, right, is very liberating.
Yeah.
And also, it really does show you who are your friends and who are your fair weather friends and who was just kind of secretly always maybe judging you anyway, and now they just have the perfect excuse to be like, I'm done with you. So there's something that's very freeing about that, you know? Yes. And so there are some people, some very high level people and some in between people. And also, again, just regular people that still, even they don't have a career that they might lose. And they even say that in the message. They go, I don't even have anything to lose, but other than like some of my friendships and stuff, but I'm terrified to come out and tell people that I'm a conservative or that I voted for Trump. And so there's a lot of that. I would also say that the people who have actually unfriended me are very few that I know of. There's a lot of people who haven't said anything.
Yeah.
So
silence is telling.
It's either they don't know what to say, they have already decided that I'm out of their life, but just haven't gotten around to telling me, and maybe won't. I don't know. Or they maybe secretly agree with me, but didn't say anything and still haven't, and I don't know, right? So I'm not going to presume to prejudge any of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, there are people who are diehard Democrats who are never Trumpers, who think he is orange man bad, all of the things, but know me and know my heart, and reached out when I endorsed Trump. And they said, and they saw the hate that I was getting. And they said, I just want you to know that while I vehemently disagree with your politics, I love you and I will always love you.
Okay.
And I am so grateful for those people specifically.
Oh, yeah.
Because it not only helped me with this fear of, man, am I about to just like disappoint so many people in my life? By the way, and again, disappointment that's on them, not on me, but like you still feel that, right?
Oh, yeah.
But also it gave me a lot of hope that there are still people that are rational enough to recognize that, hey, listen, like I know you. And if you feel compelled to go vote this way, I don't think you're a Nazi.
Yeah.
I think you're wrong.
Yes. You're not
in
evil.
the same way that all of those friends are voting for someone who I think is an actual Marxist communist.
Yes.
And would be pulling our country into absolute peril. But I'm not looking at them saying, you communist Marxist. I'm going, no, you're believing that narrative. I'm believing this narrative. Either of us could be wrong, but I am not going to love this human being.
Those are special.
So those people I am mostly grateful for in their ability to differentiate those things.
They're very special people.
Very special.
They're the smaller category. I would proffer.
Well, perhaps. I don't know. I think that there's a lot more. Hopefully, I think there's a lot more rational people out there that recognize, at least hopefully, based on the relationship I've had with them. Because all I've ever tried to do is love people more than anything else. I love people. I love all people, I just want us all to get to the right places. And I think that unfortunately there are different avenues that some people think this is the way to go. And I don't think that's the way to go. I think this is the better way, the better probability, right? That's not going to be rocky. Again, I'm not saying that somehow Trump is the perfect, and there's not going to be any issues already. Like some of the cabinet picks that he's making right now, people are like, some of them are amazing, and other ones like, what is happening right now? But I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt and recognize that there's a lot of 4D chess and all the things going on behind.
By the way, the guy that they've picked for energy is fabulous, Chris Wright. If you don't know who he is,
right.
you'd
and
really,
he understands fracking. I'm
oh my God! But you'd really like him. He's just a really clever guy,
and
real science guy.
That guy and Bobby are guaranteed going to have some great conversations.
Okay.
And truth will, all we want is the truth, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, when you endorsed Bobby Kennedy, Robert RFK, did you know him, and do you know him now? And what kind of person is he?
When I first endorsed him, when I first decided that I was going to vote for him, I knew of him. I knew of some of his stances. As someone who has been very, 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 very skeptical, particularly of Big Pharma, my entire life, that was one of the things that as traumatic as my childhood was with my parents and my mom also was an incredible human being who instilled a lot of really great things into me and my sisters. And one of those was to have a healthy level of distrust of our government and a healthy level of distrust for all large industry. Because absolute power corrupts absolutely. You have got to recognize that. You've got to be willing to know that there's a very good chance that there are people working in these places that don't have your best interest in mind and will do anything they want and can to capitalize on your ignorance. And so being able to have my eyes open my whole life, that led me down a journey of really, my mom was very crunchy. We didn't have sugared cereal. We didn't have sugared soda. We had healthy alternatives for all of these things. And because of that,
that's true child abuse.
But because of that, I don't have this insatiable sweet tooth. I know people that cannot go a day without drinking multiple Cokes or Diet Cokes. It's not good for you, bro. It's really not good for you. I'm just saying.
Hang on, just look how well he looks, though.
So anyway, so me and my sisters have always had a disposition along those lines, right?
I just want to bring you to the book then and ask you this. You're skeptical of Big Pharma and you've always have been, but you...
Taking antidepressants?
Yeah, you swear. Yeah. I would say you swear by antidepressants now. I
don't swear by them.
Go ahead.
But yeah. So, just to tie a bow on the Bobby of it all. So anyway,
yes,
I saw him talking about that he might be running. He was trying to run for the Democratic seat. I would have voted Democrat for the first time in my life had that happened. By the way, probably would have voted for Bernie had he run, but that didn't happen. I voted independent, both libertarian, both in 2016 and 2020 because I voted my conscience or whatever. I could not vote for either other candidate. That was where I was then. So then Bobby starts coming up in that, and he's also the only person who's being vocally skeptical about what's going on with the pandemic and all of these things. I'm like, this guy has got balls. He's got balls and he's got integrity, and he's willing to put his own career on the line by going, and he's already done it, by the way, for years and years and years, going after large industry that was polluting the environment and all these various things, right? And so then I ended up so I was already going to vote for him. And then I went to a fundraiser of his in Austin at Aubrey Marcus's ranch here outside of Austin. And it was a health summit. And Callie Means was there and all these other wonderful speakers. And it was just an incredible day. I ended up doing a sweat lodge, like a proper, indigenous sweat lodge with like 40 people. And me and Bobby were two of those 40 people in this lodge. And you're in there for like 2 hours. And it's intense. But it's a spiritual experience. I mean, it's a really incredible thing. So all of those things, I was like, if this guy, I can't think of another presidential candidate that is this grounded as a human being. That like legitimately is a human. It is not just a puppet of the deep state or government or whatever else, but genuinely is a human being. All of his foibles are all that are on the table. And he just genuinely wants to make this country a better country and fix it. So that's how I got onto the Bobby train. And then ultimately I became friends with Tulsi Gabbard, and Tulsi and I were talking about all of our issues.
Well, what's he like as a person, as a human
wonderful
being?
He's a wonderful human being. Like he's never, Like when you're talking to him, you're just talking to a human being. Like, and I know that, people say that about various, even movie stars, like, oh, he's just a regular guy, whatever it is. Like, but no, I mean, like, legitimately, he's so passionate about wanting to fix what is broken. And it's not a matter, I can tell you with everything in me, there is not, unlike Trump, where you can feel ego on him a lot of the time, right? Which is difficult because I still also think he does want to make America great again. I do think he wants to make America healthy again. I do think he, at the core, inside, buried in the ego, it's there. Like, I believe that. But you don't have any ego. You don't have to, there's no ego to bust through, to chisel through with Bobby Kennedy. He's like, what you see is what you get. Well,
I would argue with Trump, what you see is what you get.
Yes. Yeah, sorry. That's not the best term for it, but yes.
You see different things. But
yes, exactly. Well, I guess what I'm saying is he really is just an authentic, not ego-driven human being. Like he was not in this so he could be the president. He was in this because if I'm going to help try to fix all of these broken systems, seemingly that's the best way that I can do it. And I will say, I believe that though he's not going to have that position, I'm believing that God is orchestrating all of this so that he's actually going to be even more effective in the position that he will have. Because as president, he would have to give a lot of his energy to a lot of other areas. Mm-hmm. And now he can just hone in on be the bulldog in HHS and be over all of those industry, all of those, 3-letter agencies in the same way that Tulsi Gabbard hopefully will be national,
security.
What's the word?
National intelligence.
Intelligence.
Yes.
Director of National Intelligence, and over the FBI and CIA and all of those guys.
Yes.
The people that put her on a
watch list. Yeah.
Watch list.
Like insane.
Yes.
Insane. So that's my hope. And
it's very funny. The legacy media are all saying, how can we have somebody who's the director of national intelligence who was on a TSA watch list? And the answer to that is the fact that she was on a TSA watch list means she needs to go in there and destroy these organizations.
Yeah.
Destroy. That means they need to be not reformed, but destroyed.
Yeah. I mean, the Reformation might require destruction. It might be that it's just a total gutting, like you can still leave some bit of the bones of the structure, but you're doing a full remodel. Like, I don't know. I'll leave that up to their much better understanding.
Zach's in favor of a Reformation, which brings us back to the original conversation we had about the difference between the Catholic and the Protestant churches.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, where the Protestant churches, they sing.
Well, you still sing in Catholic church.
Not the same.
Hymns.
No, not the same. No, there's a bit of singing, but in the Protestant, everyone sings, and I'm a big believer in that, in everyone singing.
Yeah.
But the Catholics, it's got this kind of quiet thing, and there's something quite powerful when everyone in the church is singing. I wanted to ask you about. I just read recently because I'm watching you on Twitter, and I'm loving everything, by the way. And I do think it's interesting. Exactly what you said earlier, that when you're writing to somebody writes, they say something. You're writing these essays that are, very, very well written, by the way, and take a lot of time. So it's and anybody's writing to you and you're basically taking them on. And I don't know how much time you're spending, but a lot of time, I think, spending on that.
Well, the irony is that when you're making a movie, which I was just doing the last 3 months,
you hang around a lot.
There's so much sitting around.
Yeah, I got you.
And so, we'll talk. I'll talk with my castmates. Okay, there's nothing to talk about. Okay, well, I'll be on my phone. I'll go do that. Yeah.
So one thing that struck me was someone asked you about your favorite Bible verse, and you said Psalm 139, which... Yeah. I then went, I don't know them off by heart, but then I looked at it and I actually really love that psalm. And I particularly like that psalm because I actually think that psalm speaks very, very, very directly to abortion, about being known and being known since you were knitted together in your mother's womb. And I always get a catch in my throat literally saying that because I just think that that's really, everything is there. And I know you've been... which I really appreciate. You've been speaking out on the abortion issue, which I think, funny enough, bad enough and all as it is to support RFK or Trump, I think coming out on the side of pro-life for somebody in Hollywood, I would say is potentially worse. Am I right? Because it's a creed. It's almost like a creed that you have to be pro-abortion in Hollywood. And to say anything else is just so abhorrent to people in Hollywood that it's like, are we wrong about that?
I don't know. It's difficult because they're I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. You know, like I don't know that there's many people that are pro-life that like, it is the most charged. I mean, it's really unfortunate that you could almost take away every other issue, every other potential policy.
Yes.
And it all boils down to pro-choice and pro-life. That's really what it does.
Yeah.
Because it is, of all of them, I mean, there are others that I suppose you could call them life or death, but it really is it's life or death, right? And depending on who you're asking, it's the life and death of a child, or it's the life and death of the mother, which is really the life and death of potential death of physical death of the mother, but it's the social death. It's the, well, I'm having my choice, my autonomy, my freedom taken away from me because this thing happened to me. And I don't want this thing to happen to me, right? And so they don't see it as, because they can't allow themselves to see it as a separate life. Now, there's still a spectrum in there too. So, you know, there are people that are on the farthest right of it. They say it's life is at conception and that's it. And there's no discussing. And then there's people on the very, very left side that say you can kill a baby, not a baby. You can kill a fetus, right? But at that point they call it
9 months,
whatever product of conception.
Yeah, what's that?
They call it a product of conception.
A product of conception. You can terminate it all the way up until right before it would come out of the womb, and their argument is, well, because you know it's still dependent on me. To which I would say, well, wait a minute. Right after it comes out of you, it's still entirely dependent.
Incredible,
on you,
and for many
for years, really. So, are you suggesting that we should be able to kill the baby once it's outside of you? Well, absolutely not. You go, okay, well then let's back it up. Let's back it up. If you can't kill it then, because that would be wrong. We all agree that killing an actual child outside of the womb would be wrong. That's murder. So back it up 30 minutes and that's back inside of you.
Or a day, 1 day, 2 days.
No, but just say back at 30 minutes. Still the same? Still the same, baby? But again, if you're working with somebody who hasn't really thought through the logic, but hopefully you could, they would hopefully go, it's still the same life. Okay, so at what point then, whilst in gestation, does it become this now separate life from you?
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, this is one of the things I've talked about on Twitter. I just want, once and for all, I want there to be a tribunal, not a tribunal, a gathering, a committee of the wisest, smartest doctors, scientists, spiritual peoples of all different walks who are logical, rational, and who can sit down and they can hash it out and go, when does the second life I know it's going to be impossible.
Can't be done.
No, they don't want to go there. I mean,
no, because then it can't be political currency anymore. But
it's not that. No, I think the truth is too uncomfortable for them. I mean,
what's the truth?
That, well, let's say the magical cutoff date is 12 weeks. So that means it's okay then to kill that fetus baby at 11 weeks, 6 days. What's the difference? So you can kill before midnight, but after midnight, it's illegal.
And by the way, sorry, I mean, the actual reason, I think the reason why they have these, why now what they're pushing for everywhere is abortion up to 9 months. The reason for that is the minute you start saying 22 weeks, 21 weeks, you're really focusing on the humanity of the baby. And that's the last thing pro-abortion people want to do, because then it's like, then we're looking at it. We're looking at this baby, and they hate that. That's what
I'm saying. Then it becomes they lose the political currency of whatever all that is.
I'm kind of conscious of the time, but I want to just mention one of the tweets that you had, which was you commented on a video of a young woman who I just adore, and I haven't met her, but I'd love to meet her, Heidi Crowder, who has Down syndrome, right? And she's in the UK, and you commented on the video. She's an absolute rock star, right? Yeah. She's married, and she's just great. And in the UK, basically, Down syndrome, clubfoot, and cleft palate children can be killed up to 9 months. Yeah. With no exceptions. And obviously, as you probably know, in Iceland, they have cured Down syndrome. Yeah. They have cured Down syndrome in Iceland because basically they kill every baby that gets a Down syndrome diagnosis. But Heidi is, and you should maybe try and follow her on Twitter. She is hilarious. And herself and the husband, and they go to the cinema, and they're really, really fun. And actually, it just strikes me, because it's like the last thing we want to talk about is your big plan for your studio. And it strikes me as, She would be the greatest subject for a movie, by the way, because she's hysterical. Like, she is really, really funny. And what she went through to get, and now got married, and she's basically fighting for the lives of her type.
Yeah.
In the UK and around the world.
That's
And she's just great. And when I saw you writing, and you gave 2 prayer signs and a heart for Heidi Crowder. Anyway, I just love her. But have you faced much backlash for what you've been saying about abortion?
I mean, there's been a lot of people who have. I don't know that specifically about abortion. Well,
okay.
Not specifically about abortion as much as like I had people when I was endorsing Trump and wanting him to get elected, and there were people saying, but he's going to take away women's rights.
Women's rights.
And there was a gentleman who's a voiceover actor who I don't really know him all that well, but I think we've been at a few conventions together, and we follow each other on Twitter, and we have a lot of mutual friends. And he has a friend who she's a voiceover actress, and she had recorded a video about how she had this insane scare. She lives in Nashville, and she was pregnant and she started bleeding, but her OBGYN wouldn't see her because they were afraid that they might get caught into a lawsuit. And so then she just had to stay at home, and she thought she was going to bleed out, but eventually she was okay, but it was the scariest thing. And this is why, we need to have these things. Now, and he was like, how could you possibly vote for someone who's going to endanger women like this? Now, there's so much to talk about in that. Number one, she could have gone to the ER immediately. So there's a lot of things just in that, but not even wanting to get into the details of her particular thing.
Yeah.
I said, listen, to me, one of the lost arts of humanity right now is triage. We get so lost in our emotions, in our emotionalism about any given thing. I care absolutely about women and women's rights, and also about the life and the rights of a child inside of a woman. That's a whole conversation in and of itself. But we've got to be willing to say, okay, we've got one candidate who is basically, you think is more pro-women because she's saying by the way, she never even said what she was going to do. The thing is that because Trump was a part of rolling back Roe v. Wade, which, by the way, even Ginsburg said should have happened.
Correct.
I mean, the queen that they all hold up to be, this is our woman, and all of feminists want to hold up to. But to roll it back to the states did not take this away. Now, some states have made it very, very illegal and very difficult to get it, right? The beauty of the United States is that you can still live within the United States, but live in a different part of the United States if you don't like it.
Correct.
And that was what it was always supposed to be.
Yep.
We were supposed to have very little federal overreach and a lot of state. And what would have been great about that, if we would have stayed to a lot of that, is that we would have been able to have 50 different Petri dishes that would have showed us, through example, what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Like, drugs, for example. In the 60s, Nixon went crazy and everything was Schedule 1 or whatever it was, and marijuana and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, I think it would have been nice if there would have been a couple of states that would have been like, actually, no, we're going to let people do this because we're not so afraid that this is going to turn everybody into zombies and this and that and whatever. And actually, we might learn a lot. And as it turns out, they've now been able to study MDMA and LSD and psilocybin and marijuana and CBD. And there are a lot of really wonderful things that they've been able to do in clinic, particularly with PTSD. Psilocybin and MDMA, combinations of those are the most healing for any, like soldiers coming back from war who were a part of killing people and saw their friends killed. Like these types of things. But because we just went, nope, blanket, done, none of it, we all lost out in that transaction. For us to have held on to the states being able to determine on abortion and allowing certain states to be far more strict and other states to be more liberal about it, we would have, over the last 80 years, or what was Roe v. Wade in the 60s, right? Or something like that. So 70. So, 70-ish years, whatever. We would have had 70 years to see what that would actually do in different populations. And we would have learned from that.
Yeah.
But we didn't, because we did what we did, right?
Yes.
So, but Trump has made it very clear he has no intention of doing some federal abortion ban or anything.
Yeah.
So nothing, and by the way, Kamala wouldn't have been able to roll back the Dobbs decision. So there was nothing that she would have done better for women that Trump was not already not going to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so all of that didn't make any sense either. But even still, I go, even if there was something here, to me, it's more important that we're addressing not getting into World War III and actually making sure that all of our food and water and air and everything else isn't poisoning us. Because yes, there are some women who are falling through the cracks when it comes to the restrictive nature of some of these laws. There are. No,
I listen, when you get into the weeds.
I know when you get into the weeds. I know, and I know that there are some examples that the left holds up, and I know that they're not true. But there are some. I would say that there are some women still, maybe even a few. Listen, and those are lives, and we have to be considerate of that. But I would still argue those are only a few. Still lives, still things we need to care about, but that's a few examples, whereas the entire nation is being poisoned in our food and our water and our air. So to me, that and not getting into World War III, which would literally kill everyone on earth, the triage of that trumps what those things are. So that's what I've gotten into when it comes to a lot of the abortion stuff. Most people aren't coming at me for that. It's more just you're supporting a fascist, you're supporting, a sexist.
Have you met the fascist? Have you met Trump?
I've not. No. Maybe at some point, I don't know.
You'll enjoy him more
his
than
team
you
has
think.
reached out to me. Like, it was really interesting. Like, I did that town hall, but then immediately I left. I was off to the Republic of Georgia to go make this movie. And then, of course, right after that, all this media stuff and everything started coming. And the Trump campaign was like, can you go on the road? We want you to go to this thing and that thing. I'm like, I can't. I can't.
Yeah.
I'll do what I can.
I can campaign for you in Georgia. The Georgian vote,
Well, yeah. But fortunately, I was still able to do stuff like the Rubin Report and Megyn Kelly. And, I was still able to do what I could, remotely.
Yeah. What do we think about asking Zach to read that psalm? Would you read that psalm?
Sure. You got it?
139.
Well, it's one of the psalms, which are essentially, poems, writings, songs. This one is to the choir master, a psalm of David. O Lord, you have searched me and you've known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all of my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol in the depths, you are there. If I take to the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. For you formed me, my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I could count them, they are more than the sand. I awake, and I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there is any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. I will say that the only part of this psalm that I don't resonate with
I think I know.
is 21 through 22, do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord, and whatnot. And I think that's because, in Christ, in the New Testament, this has been redeemed, that we are no longer to hate. Although I think if you do a deep dive into the actual translation of what hate means in this, it's not this, it is to not hold in that love, in that esteem. It's like, now, like, this.
Thank you. Oh my God. It's wonderful.
I've read that so many times in my life.
It's amazing. Thank you for choosing that. I'm so glad I saw that, and I said to Phelim, I might ask Zach to read it.
Yeah, happy to.
Okay, thank you. I want to move to asking you about the studio, that this vision you have for the studio here in Austin. Can you tell us about that?
I'll give you
what's the plan?
The quickest rundown, because I know we've been going long.
Yeah.
But listen, the long and the short of it is, when I was 4, I think when we're all around 3 or 4 is when our consciousness kind of comes online. Like prior to that, you're alive, but you're moving around and you're bumping around and bumping into things, but you don't really start remembering things and start really to kind of like, oh, this is what's going on, until around 3 or 4. And around 4, my consciousness started coming online, and it was like I knew things. I knew that I was going to be an actor. I knew that there was a God. I knew that that God loved me. Like I remember being in a Sunday school, and I remember there was a person trying to explain God to me, and I was like, no, I got it. Like I knew, it wasn't like a thing to grasp. I was like, totally, I got it. But I also knew that I was meant to build communities. And I've been doing it my whole life. I mean, my house in LA was one of those places.
Yep, right. We remember.
And I think part of that was also when I was around 4, I remember seeing a cul-de-sac. You know what a cul-de-sac is, right?
Yep.
I remember seeing a cul-de-sac for the first time, and I remember being like, oh, this is it. And I didn't know exactly what it was, but I was like, this, I want this. We're all supposed to have this. And I think every kid actually kind of has that. And the reason why is because I think literally evolutionarily, we understand what tribe and community is. And when you look at a cul-de-sac, it is that. It is this protection. It is this circular, like all your neighbors are there, and it's like a little village, know? And so I always knew, literally ever since I was a kid, I would talk to my friends and family. I said, I'm going to buy a bunch of land one day, and I'm going to build a whole compound of a thing, and all my friends and family will all live there. And people will be like, okay, again, pat me on the head. And then when I was 18, 19 years old, and I started to actually, like this dream of being an actor started to come to fruition, and I started to actually work in Hollywood, and I started seeing behind the curtain, and I saw how all the sausage was made, and I was so bummed out. Not because, I had assumed correctly that it was an inhumane industry, but I assumed incorrectly that the inhumanity was the price that we all paid for excellence. And then what I found out very quickly was, nobody gives a shit about excellence in Hollywood. It's just a matter of commoditizing art and artists in whatever way possible. By the way, happening at the hands of a bunch of executives who are not creative or not visionary, who by and large, not that there aren't a few, there are a few executives out there that I think actually are good and bring good to projects, but they are few and far between. By and large, most of all of that middle management executive stuff screws up the creative, the quality of the excellence of the creative, and it takes a lion's share of the money from the artists and the people creating the art. And I was so bummed out. I was like, God, why would you want me to go be an actor in this insanely broken system? I can't do this. I don't want to be a part of this. Because I knew that as much as we might not like it, you might not like a thing, but if you decide to participate in it, you are complicit in it. And I didn't want to be complicit in that. And I really felt like God told me, and again, he's talked to me a few times in my life, not in this auditory way, but like speaking to your soul, but almost like there's words. And he was like, Zach, you're not wrong. It's super broken, but I'm going to fix it. I'm going to use you as someone to help fix it. But you need to, what's going to happen, this is how it's going to happen. You have to ride on this broken boat and use this broken boat to build your relationships and reputation and resources long enough while I give you the downloads of the design, the blueprints for the new boat. And then at the right moment, you're going to jump ship to the new boat, and you're going to bring as many people with you 2 by 2 as you can onto this ark and get away from this. And that all started coming to fruition at 19 years old, which is now, I'm 44 now, so 25 years ago. And very quickly I knew I couldn't do it in California. I'm from Cali. I love Cali, but it's super broken, as we've talked about. You guys know it. Weather's great, but other than that, it couldn't be in California. And I was like, okay, well, if it's not going to be in California, where am I going to go do this? I was like, it's got to probably be in a state with no state income tax, so I can save as much of my own money as I could to invest into this vision. I got to do it in this. Of all those states, it's got to be one that's got at least the most manageable weather, right? Washington State, not happening. Gray and gloomy all the time. Nevada, kind of a wasteland. I mean, honestly, there's nothing really going on there. Tahoe, there's the bit there, but nobody in Tahoe. That's an hour and a half away from the nearest airport, and nobody in Tahoe wants you to build a whole big, movie studio up there. And I wasn't about to go do anything in Vegas. I'm not a fan of Vegas, even though I know that Mark Wahlberg is trying to do something out there. But I do want to talk to those guys. Then you had like some of the states that are up north, those winters not happening. And Florida, though it can be nice sometimes, is way more humid and the bugs are massive. And I didn't want to deal with hurricanes. So I was like, well, where does that leave me? That leaves you Texas and Tennessee. And I was like, okay, well, these are the two Goldilocks-ish states. Now I need to be within 30 minutes of the cultural epicenter of either one of those states. And that was either Nashville or Austin. And I went and looked at Nashville in 2013 because I had friends there. And I almost moved to Nashville then. I bought a couple hundred acres out there. But I didn't feel like God was pulling me there. And then a couple years went by, did some Broadway, did all these things, got married and divorced. I mean, life took a lot of L's. And then I was like, you know what? I never really gave Austin that really solid look. And I came out here till the end of 2016. And I spent a week driving north, south, east, and west. And I felt like God was saying, yeah, this is it. This is where you're supposed to go. And I knew specifically I was supposed to come out this way because north and west and south were already getting way too developed. And the most available, affordable, developable land was all out east, out this way toward Bastrop. More than that, it's on the other side of the airport. So if I'm trying to get people to this intentional city that I'm trying to build, they don't have to go through all the rigmarole of going through the traffic of Austin. They come straight here, 15 minutes. And also I wanted to be on water because I think water is a massively important thing for just enjoying life, but also sustaining life. And there was no way I could find hundreds of acres that were on any of the lakes anywhere around here. But the Colorado River that's dammed up multiple times that makes up Lake Travis and Lake Austin and City Lake and all that, the last dam is the east of town, and then it becomes the free-flowing Colorado River. And nobody was buying any land along the Colorado, and it's a beautiful river. And so I was able to buy 75 acres and with the hopes of buying more that's next to me. Yeah. That is still the hope. By the way, the concept for the studio has always been to just try and not just solve all the brokenness that is in Hollywood. And there are so many issues. There are so many ways that we can make it better, so many ways, but also giving people better lives. I don't want to just build a place to work. I want to build a place where people live there full time. It's like a kibbutz on steroids. You know what I mean? It's like all of our working situation and facilities are there, but we build backlots, but they're not just like little kind of, two little streets and just facades that are, you walk through, if you go to like a New York backlot in Hollywood, it looks photorealistic on the outside, but you walk through the front door and it's just plywood and nonsense back then. It's soulless. It's an incredible, kind of analogy for Hollywood itself. But but I was always like, well, why don't we just build like a 40-acre, metropolitan backlot that we could shoot anything we want in? But also, these are real brownstones and apartments and hotels and restaurants and bars. And why not? Why not? Yeah. Because everyone who would live there all works there. We're all in on it. It's not like anybody's there like, oh, I can't believe, because this is part of the problem when you go shoot on location. Nobody wants you there. Yeah. Everyone in New York is like, get out of my street. I don't care if you paid me. I don't want you filming there at 4 a.m. And you don't want to be there. Yeah. So I was like, there's so many ways that you can really make an incredible, like, state-of-the-art campus of tomorrow. But I need more space for that. And so I knew when I moved here, I was like, okay, well, I got to find in order to buy more land and to build this intentional city, I'm going to need like $1 billion. I need to find some altruistic billionaire who's going to help me do this. And the only person I could think, this was 7 years ago, and the only person I could think of was Elon Musk, who I was already a fan of at that point because he's kind of an alien like me. I think, he thinks really big and he wants to go and do cool things in the world and advance humanity. And I have a lot of respect for him. And he's a gamer and all that stuff. Anyway, so I was like, all right, well, maybe one day I'll be able to convince Elon to help me with this. Well, wouldn't you know it, 2 years after I moved out, Elon was like, I'm done with California and I'm moving to Austin. Yeah. And 2 years after that, of all the country roads all around Austin that he could have bought land on to build Starlink and X and Boring Company headquarters, he bought and built on my road, 2 ranches down from where my ranch is. And that's amazing and also horrible because the people who own the land around me all want exorbitant amounts of money now because they want Elon money.
Yes.
So he owes it to me at this point.
I remember when he announced that he was moving there, and I was like, "Oh my God, what a win for Zach!" I was so happy for you.
You're saying it's a lose because you want to expand.
Well, no, I mean it's only a lose if I can't convence Elon to help me with it. Yes. But here's the thing: I don't know. I've just always felt in my gut like it's meant to be. I don't know. Like we have way too many mutuals. He now literally has built right down the road from me. I also look at it as yet another little connective tissue of, I think Elon's gonna be maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that we are pulling the same direction.
Yeah.
Before he ever came out and really was endorsing Trump, I was like, I'm gonna go endorse Trump. And then Elon was like, I'm gonna go endorse Trump.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, we're pulling in the same direction. He wants to turn X into a really truly competitive distribution platform. I want to help him do that.
Yeah.
I want to be the studio that's creating content that makes X better than any of Netflix and Amazon and anything else, because I know how to do it. Yeah. Like if he's the Nikola Tesla, Henry Ford of our generation, I want to be the Walt Disney of our generation. And I think that's what God has always put on my heart, because I not only want to make really cool content, but I know how to do a new type of turning that into amusement park, like making it a fully interactive experience for all of that and giving people better lives. And that's what I'm good at, So anyway, so that's what Wildwood Studios, that's what it is. Yeah, WYLDWOOD.
So
wonderful.
Talking of content, Shazam 2 didn't do so well.
No.
Shazam 1 did very well, Shazam 2. You've been public about that. Do you still think it was sabotaged by powerful people in Hollywood?
Well, I never said that I thought it was sabotaged by powerful people in Hollywood.
Okay, tell me why. Okay,
yeah. I well, listen. I mean, I think that there's myriad reasons. I think that it. I don't think the release date was a great one. I think that we originally were supposed to actually come out for the Christmas holiday. And then Warner Brothers got spooked because Spider-Man or something was also coming out. And I was like, guys, it's Christmas. Yeah. People go to multiple movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
We shouldn't be worried about this.
Yeah, correct.
And then they pushed us to, I think it was March or something. It was like St. Patrick's Day weekend. And, it's a family movie.
Yes.
And that's not a really family movie weekend or whatever. I was like, so I think that was, first of all, I think that was not great. I think that the marketing for it left something to be desired. I think that they were really leaning in far too much into a lot of these clips of me fighting a dragon, and they were losing a lot of the heart and family dynamic that really made it special and different. In a lot of the advertising. So I think, and listen, this is not an indictment of Warner Brothers, the wonderful people working in advertisement there. I just think that as a whole, Hollywood has they've lost a lot of understanding of what it means to make great movies and market great movies. I think it's indicative of the whole.
You're saying it's a family movie. Exactly. It was about family, and it is a family movie. But to me, the thing that I watched it, and it's there's the first gay character in it, in a superhero movie. And to me, that was just thrown in there, and then everyone moved on. And to me, it just felt like this kind of virtue signaling, wokeness. And to me, that it took me out of the movie. It made me, almost, why are we doing this?
I get that.
And I just am trying to imagine someone there with his young kids who are watching a great family movie, and then suddenly there are people talking about sex in the middle of this, and it's like,
but we weren't talking about sex.
I know,
but you were talking about, one's, preferred, gender or I don't know. But listen, to your point, there are a lot of people that felt that way. I understand. I think of all of the movies and shows that are adding that type of stuff, I think we did it in one of the most least offensive ways. moreover, it is canon to the newer comic books. So that was not something that they just added to add. That was from the comic book itself, from what I gathered. So listen, but I don't think that was... The only reason people knew that was because they had already gone to the movie to go to see that. I don't think that was why people didn't go to the movie. There might have been some people that were like, I heard there's some wokeness and I don't go. I think that there was also listen, it's been a very messy situation, the DCU for a while, because they used to be kicking Marvel's butt, right? Like Marvel couldn't make a good movie until Iron Man. And we had Superman, Christopher Reeves, Batman, you know, like so there was a lot of good DC titles. But then Marvel with Iron Man, and really you have to give the credit to Favreau and Downey Jr. because those are the guys who really made that movie incredible. I mean, everybody, but really those two guys, they really did it. And then Feige, I think, was smart in that eventually he was like, we just need to basically kind of copy this tone and apply it to all of the titles. And somebody else was like, yeah, we can build a universe with that. And they're like, oh, yeah. And so then they did that, which is great because that's what the comics all were anyway. Yes. You know, I would read Spider-Man and I would read Hulk and they would guest star in each other's comic books and stuff. So that was very smart. And they crushed it. And DC was reeling and they were like, oh crap, well, what do we do? We got to build our own universe. Well, how do we do that? Nolan wasn't going to do it. Nolan didn't want to do it, even though he was the most successful DC director at that point. Snyder did want to do it. And Snyder got the blessing to do it. And I think that though he tried, and I think he really cares, and I do think that Snyder can visually has made some cool, like I think the 300 was a really cool movie. I liked it. And I even think Man of Steel, there was some stuff about that I really liked too. But I think that character and story, unfortunately, weren't as strong in a lot of those, particularly like Batman versus Superman. It was really, really dark and didn't make a lot of sense. Like there were a lot of really convenient things that just happened through the movie that kind of move it forward. And I was like, you kind of have to turn your mind off a little bit for that. And, but there were a lot of like hardcore who are Snyder fans or Snyder Cutter fans or whatever that like, so Snyder directed Man of Steel, then he did Batman versus Superman, and then he did Justice League. He did the first version of Justice League. That first version of Justice League, from what I heard from the people who worked at Warner Brothers, was unreleasable. And they didn't know what to do with it. And then, very unfortunately, Snyder's daughter had died. I think she had committed suicide or something like that. It was tragic. He had to go attend to that. In the midst of all of that, then they said, okay, well, let's bring in Joss Whedon, who just did these Avengers movies and did very well with them. Yeah. We'll have Joss come and he'll fix up Justice League and we'll then do that. Well, even with Joss coming in, it still ended up maybe even worse because now you got these two different directors with two different visions. And then people are like, it's Justice League. It's not Justice League, it's Justice League. And that was not great. And so a lot of the Snyder fans were really angry that he didn't get his version of Justice League done or released. And so then it was then it created this fissure in the DC fan base. And we unfortunately got caught up in all of that. And part of what happened was I was at a convention after the first Shazam, and I had seen all this release the Snyder cut stuff that was online. And I found it to be personally like kind of laughable because I was like, I don't think these people understand how Hollywood works. There's not a cut to release. Like he made a cut. There's a director's cut, but it's a rough cut. There's tons of VFX that aren't done, the mixing and coloring. Like you can't, there's not a thing that Warner Brothers fully made, but they're keeping from the public. Like you can't, it's not there. And so somebody had asked me about it at a convention and have you heard about the Snyder Cut? And I was like, yeah, I have. And I made some, quip about yeah, it doesn't exist. I don't know why everybody's, so I kind of made a joke about it. Well, the Snyder Cut fans were like, we're going to destroy this guy. How dare he mock us? How dare, and I was like, now to me, I was having a conversation with just this one guy in the audience. Little did I know it was being recorded and then that was going to end up online. And by the way, and also the Snyder, some of them, then also when Shazam 2 came out, they started to take my Instagram lives and edit them and then repost them as if I was saying, like, I was talking about how John Wick 4 or whatever was out that weekend. And I was saying, guys, I love John Wick. I love Keanu Reeves. Not a family movie. If you want to go to a family movie, maybe, you can go to Shazam 2. They cut it all together to make it sound like I was on Keanu Reeves and John Wick.
Yeah.
Like, just detestable. Yeah. Detestable. All because they wanted to destroy me because I joked about that there is no Snyder Cut, which at that point there wasn't. Mm-hmm. And the only reason why ultimately we did get a Snyder Cut version of Justice League was because of the pandemic. Yeah. Once the pandemic happened, all of the content dried up, and Warner Brothers went to Zack Snyder and said, okay, how much would it be to finish out a cut of this, to do the VFX, and by the way, it ended up being like $40 million more, or like, I don't know, something ridiculous.
Crazy. But
it was stuff that he could do, shooting individual actors, like not getting a big crew. Yeah. He could do green screen. He could do all these things. And he was able to complete his Snyder Cut and release it, which then gave all of these people even more fuel to think, you were wrong, you, Zachary Levi's an idiot. Like, I mean, it was insane. So all of those things conspired, but also, listen, not for nothing, before the movie came out, so I had seen a post on Twitter and somebody had said, agree or disagree, Pfizer is more of an enemy to the world right now than a help. And I said, hardcore agree. And I meant it, and I still mean it. Now, right after I tweeted that, it was like late at night. I wake up the next morning to a slew of missed phone calls and texts from my managers, agents, publicists, everybody. And they're like, you got to take it down. And I was like, wait, no. What do you mean take it down? By the way, we were already in 2022 at this point. Mm-hmm. It was already very clear that the vaccine wasn't working, that we were all being lied to.
It's really weird. That's not... I mean, even if it's wrong, it's not.
No.
You're not calling for the murder of people. You're not calling.
No.
It's a very weird thing.
But more than that, and I didn't even get into the vaccines at that point. I followed it up with, here's an example. And it was an example of a class action lawsuit that they had to pay out billions of dollars for because they knowingly put one of their products to market, knowing that it was not just ineffective, it killed people. And they did it anyway. And so they had to pay out billions of dollars. But this is how they do it. This is how all of these pharmaceutical companies do it. They knowingly release ineffective, harmful things that they can sell and make $15 billion doing it by the time anybody gets wise. Then a class action lawsuit may get leveled at them. And then they have to pay out $3 billion, $4 billion, and they still net $10, $11, $12 billion. And none of them go to prison because it's a corporation that did it. It's not an individual. This is how they do this over and over and over again. So anyway, I did that. The Warner Brothers and everybody were not happy with me. I was like, listen, I stand by it. I don't understand why more people aren't up in arms and just as upset as I am. But I wish that you would. I wish that you would be. But also, if I took it down right now, that'll make it 10 times worse.
Yeah.
You're all not only giving in to the mob, but now you're signaling to them for more. I want more. I want more blood. And I'm like, I'm not going to fucking do it.
No, you're right.
And so I didn't. I stuck to my guns, and that may have had, I think that by the way, and there were then more hit pieces that came out against me. BuzzFeed, paragon of journalism.
Where are they now?
But it's dead. They ran a whole smear campaign against me. Really, them and other e-zines, random nonsense places. But then again, they get clickbaited up into Yahoo and everything else. And the clickbait headline is the troubling past of Zachary Levi, crazy shit. And then you get into the article and it's like, Zachary Levi, star of Shazam, and, failed this and blah, blah, blah. Apparently he's been, and then they go, we hear that he's not nice to women or something, like just crazy, like just making shit up because they can. And by the way, they can because of legislation. I just learned this recently. There's legislation that was passed many moons ago where you, if you are a publication, you cannot be held liable by writing lies about a
public figure.
A public figure.
Yep. Sullivan versus New York Times.
There you go. And because of that, BuzzFeed and any of these other publications
we know about
can
BuzzFeed.
write whatever they want. And they go, well, a source told us, a source might ask. There's another one that came out recently. Like, I don't know why, because people just like dragging shit up. There was something that came out as like, apparently Zachary Levi is really bitter that Shazam didn't do better. A source told us he was really angry because he thought it was going to make him like The Rock or Chris Evans, and it didn't. I'm like, who the fuck? Never, ever did I ever tell any of my friends or family that I wanted to be The Rock or Chris Evans. Of course I was disappointed that the movie didn't do better. I want all of my movies to do well. But it's totally salacious nonsense. And yet, if you go on Twitter, there's people that still totally buy it. I heard you were bitter about nut. It's like, oh my God, dude. Open your fucking eyes. Anyway.
So we ask all our guests for their favorite work of art. It can be a poem, it can be a painting, it can be a psalm, by the way, but more a work of art. And then
it is Thanksgiving. Don't forget.
It is Thanksgiving. What's that mean?
And what is your favorite? I think I've seen you writing about your favorite Thanksgiving dish.
Oh yes. What if you're cooking for someone? What's your go-to dish menu?
I don't cook. I am very, very
that's an absolute
incapable of cooking. I listen. I learned.
Stop the presses. Like this is a headline.
I know.
Now.
I need.
I've got a headline here.
I hate the fact that I don't know how to cook. I really do. But I gotta learn.
I think we've got a scoop.
But
here.
a ribeye,
Mr. Healthy Food.
A ribeye. Well, because I have good people in my life who do know how to cook, or I do meal delivery, or I eat out healthily. But ribeye steak. That I actually know how to prepare. I haven't done it often, a lot at all, but I love a good ribeye. Ribeye and a salad. That's my go-to.
Favorite work of art? What has inspired you? What?
A movie or a poem or a
piece of
play
art?
Or I think it's a hard one to ask because there's so much art out there. There's so many amazing.
I don't know.
Pieces.
I mean, well, I don't know. I think, listen, from a classical standpoint, I would say that like Michelangelo's David is probably up there. Yeah. But mainly because of the kind of philosophy behind it. Like it's an incredible piece and one that is kind of insane that he was even able to do, considering that many artists, very talented artists, had tried to tackle a piece of marble that size and couldn't do it. And for him to have been able to do it and do it so deftly is in and of itself incredible. And it's an incredible piece. But, I love that when he was asked, how did you do this? Like, how did this come to be? And he was like, well, I looked at the marble and I just took away everything that wasn't David.
Oh my God.
And I think it's just so simple and it's so powerful, And I think that that's what should be kind of any art. It's you have a vision of what it's supposed to be, and then it's really just a matter of making sure that nothing that isn't it is in there. And unfortunately, a lot of movies or TV shows or whatever, it's like, it's not what it should be. It's like, it's that, but then we'll add this, we'll add that, we'll do this. It's like, no,
don't do that.
Yeah. No. Leave it alone.
Yeah.
No, I think it was, I can't remember the philosopher, he said it's very easy to be clever. The clever thing is to be simple.
Yeah. That's true.
If you'd given me more time, I would have made it. If you'd given me more time, I'd have written it. It'd have been shorter. That thing of,
Yeah.
If I'd had more time, it'd be a lot shorter. Yeah.
But I would say from a movie perspective, I don't know. I mean, there's so many movies that have impacted my life and that I just think are wonderful. Forrest Gump actually is one of those movies. I think it's it was ahead of its time when it came to the way it was using computer graphics, even to like put him in all those old time periods and shaking hands with Kennedy.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, it was just incredible. But the performances were outstanding, and I think the messaging in it is just incredibly powerful. And I think, honestly, like, it was the first movie that I wept. I was 12, 13 or something like that when I was on a family vacation. We went to see the movie, and I started crying. I mean, I was already kind of starting to tear up as he started to lose people in his life. But at the part of the movie when, and there's still a good amount of movie left at this point, but, you know, he's sitting on that bus bench, and he's waiting for the bus, and he's kind of, you know, regaling people with all these stories, and that's what you're watching. And then all of a sudden it catches up, and now he's finished his last story essentially, and he said, you know, so I'm just trying to get to this place, you know. And the old lady's like, oh, well, that's just right around the corner. You can just run there. And so he does, and he runs to Jenny's to go meet Jenny, who he hasn't seen for a long time. And he comes in there, and Jenny's there, and her son is there and watching Sesame Street. And he's by the TV sitting there, and Forrest is talking to Jenny. And he's like, and she's like, that's my son. He's like, oh, you got a son, you're a mama. That's so great. You know, and he's genuinely happy for her. Like, not a jilted lover, not anything like that. Like, I get emotional talking about it because I just think it's so powerful. Because he as a character is so powerful. She says, yeah, his name's Forrest. And he says, oh, that's my name, you know. And she goes, yeah, I named him after his daddy. And you see him put it together that this is his son, right? And then you see him start crying because he's afraid. And he says, is he like me? And in that moment, what Tom Hanks, and what Zemeckis and what the movie is telling you is, this whole time, this whole movie, this man has been ridiculed and mocked and made fun of and bullied. And never once does he want retribution. Not once does he takes it all. He takes it all. And you think, because he's just so dumb that he's oblivious to all of this stuff. And in that moment, he's telling you, he's known all along. He's not that fucking stupid.
Yeah.
He's just that good. He's that good. He's got that good of a heart. And I broke. I started crying so hard. By the way, the first time this happened to me in my life, do you remember a television show called Life Goes On? Remember this show? Mm-hmm. It was, maybe you were probably in Ireland at the time. It was a sitcom, or like not a sitcom. It was like a drama in the 80s. It was the first show that ever had a Down syndrome actor on it. His name was Corky. And it was literally a family drama about this family, parents, a daughter who didn't have Down syndrome, and her younger brother, younger or older, anyway, her brother who had Down syndrome, and his life, and them going to school and being bullied at school. I was like 7 years old watching this show, and I broke, and I started crying and crying and crying and crying. And I was with my mom, and we were at a friend's of our family's house, and they had to bring me into the other room. But my mom was like, what happened? What's wrong? What's wrong? I'm like, it's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair. Because I didn't even know what Down syndrome was, but I saw that he was pure. Mm-hmm. Like most Down syndrome people are. They're pure.
So good.
They're love.
Yeah.
I have a nephew that has Down syndrome. Like they are, yes, they you know, they can also be mischievous and all of these things, but they have this they really lack this level of guile and deceit that we as normal people can fall into. And Forrest Gump was the same. He was pure, and I wanted him to be real. I wanted him to be real because we need more people that love like that. So that movie just...
What did Jenny say? I'm trying to remember what she said. I remember exactly the moment.
She said, she says, no, he's you know, he's top of his class, and, you know, he's all of these things, you know.
He's really smart.
He's really smart, you know. Yeah. But anyway, I mean, that movie, it was hilarious and heartwarming, but so powerful to me, you know, and so much messages in it. But and then one other movie that comes to mind, I don't know if you've ever seen it, is Amélie. It's a French film, and it's powerful, but in very different ways to me. I think it's just from a piece of art, like an artistic film. It's awesome. It's so great. But it just makes you, there's so much like, just like whimsy and joy and yeah, like magic in it, you know? So I would say those things.
How'd you spell that?
Amelie. Amelie.
Yeah.
Amelie. Yeah.
Any plans? Or what's coming out?
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Listen, well, the shameless plug part of the of the podcast. Well, so yes, Radical Love and the companion book, the 60-day reader, Go Love Yourself.
I want to. Yeah.
Those are available if anybody wants them. I recommend them. If I do say so myself, they are.
Yes.
They have been very helpful. They were very helpful for me in my journey, and I know a lot of people that they have been helpful for as well. And also there's the audiobook. And if you're a fan of Tangled and Flynn Rider, it's like having Flynn Rider read you a book on mental health. So that's fun.
Yeah.
Cannot recommend it enough.
And this one.
And
I think one of your movies is coming out in February.
Yes, The Unbreakable Boy is coming out in
Boy.
February. A Lionsgate release. We actually shot it right before American Underdog. Which was years ago, but then it was supposed to come out right after American Underdog, but the pandemic happened and Lionsgate was like, people aren't going back to theaters yet. So they kind of shelved it, but now it's finally coming out and I really hope everybody goes and sees it. It is, honestly, it's one of, I'm so proud of it. Like I'm proud of my own performance, but I'm proud of the movie in general. It is, to my knowledge, it's like the only movie that really, like basically an autistic child. It's a true story about a couple that ends up getting pregnant very quickly in their relationship, but decide to see it through and have the baby. And they quickly find out that the child has osteogenesis imperfecta, which is brittle bones. It's a genetic thing that you can inherit, which he does from his mother. But then things get more complicated when he starts to have, different behavior that is not like other kids, and they have him tested and he ends up that he has autism. And so a lot of the movie is about that. And it's about, these parents navigating their own lives and their own issues with each other, with themselves, with their other son, and Austin, their son, who's kind of the lead of the movie. But man, it's just, it's good for the whole family. It's a family movie, but definitely like intelligent, like for adult audiences. Cannot recommend it enough. Please go see it. Because it means a lot when people see it in theaters.
Yes.
Yeah.
That says a lot to the studios.
Yes.
We need people to go see movies in theaters.
Yeah.
And I have other films that are going to come out next year as well that I've been shooting, but I don't know when they're ultimately going to come out. So although Sarah's Oil, we just shot in Oklahoma, that comes out next Christmas, but no, that's
Okay.
So how do people find you on social media?
At Zachary Levi. At Zachary Levi on X and at Zachary Levi on Instagram. I'm not on Facebook. So if you see anything on Facebook, that's not me. And I'm not on anything else either. So if you're interacting, there's a lot of people that hit me in my DMs on Instagram and they're like, hey, I was talking to you on like TikTok or Snapchat. I'm like, that's not me.
Wasn't me?
Also, I'm not talking to you from any other accounts on Instagram or X. Only the official blue check mark, accept no substitutes. That is the only way that I'm me.
Well, thank you so much for this. And
Thank you.
in our Thanksgiving week, this is a
Yes.
very fitting.
Yes.
It's very fitting. And we have a lot to be thankful for. We're
do.
very grateful to know you. And it's great that things are working out so well.
Well,
and
I echo
very
that
happy.
back to you.
Very
Grateful
happy
for
about
both of
that.
you. Thank you for continuing to love me and support me and believe in me. And I love that we've maintained our friendship over many years and many miles,
Yes.
all of
Yeah.
this time until you can finally wise up and move your butts to Austin, which you should do.
And it might be happening. We'll see. Thank
Funny
you so
you should
much.
say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.